They say a wolf without a pack is already dead. Kaelira Voss had been dead for 3 years. She just hadn't stopped moving yet. Blood mixed with rain as she crashed through the undergrowth, her bare feet shredded, lungs screaming. Behind her, the hunting calls of the Ironcrest pack echoed like thunder. They wanted their property back, their weapon, their broken thing that could swallow pain and spit out obedience. But Kaelira had made a choice tonight that would either kill her by dawn or change everything. She'd stolen something they could never let go, herself. If you want to see how a girl with nothing defeats those who took everything, stay until the end, and don't forget to like and comment with your city so I know you're watching. The storm had teeth. Kaelira felt them in every gust of wind that tore at her filthy dress, every branch that whipped across her face as she stumbled through the darkness. 3 days. 3 days since she'd slipped her chains and run, and the Ironcrest hunters were still behind her, relentless as death itself. Her feet barely registered pain anymore. They'd gone numb somewhere around the second day, after the rocks had carved them open and the cold had seeped into the wounds. Now they were just distant things at the end of her legs, propelling her forward through instinct more than conscious thought. She can't have gone far. The voice carried through the trees, rough and familiar. Garrett? Of course they'd sent Garrett. He'd always enjoyed hunting her, even before she'd escaped. The little freak probably collapsed already. Track her blood. She's leaving enough of it. Kaelira's jaw clenched. She pressed herself against a massive oak, forcing her ragged breathing to slow. Her whole body shook. From cold, from exhaustion, from the hollow ache of 3 days without food. The rain plastered her dark hair to her skull, and somewhere in the back of her mind a voice whispered that this was it. This was where her story ended. No. The thought came fierce and sudden, cutting through the fog of despair. She hadn't survived 3 years of Ironcrest brutality just to die in the mud, like a wounded animal. She hadn't endured Master Cyrus's experiments, hadn't absorbed the pain of hundreds of his victims, hadn't broken herself apart and rebuilt herself in secret just to give up now. A branch snapped 20 yards to her left. Kaelira moved. Her body screamed in protest, muscles that had nothing left somehow finding one more burst of speed. The forest was a blur of black and deeper black, punctuated by brief flashes of lightning that turned the world into a nightmare of twisted shadows. She didn't know where she was running anymore. North, maybe. Away from Ironcrest territory, definitely. Beyond that, geography had become irrelevant. All that mattered was distance. Her foot caught on a root, and she went down hard, palms skidding across wet leaves and rocks. Pain exploded up her arm, fresh and sharp, the kind that cut through even her tolerance. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting copper. I heard something, over there. Move, move, move. She hauled herself up, ignoring the way her vision tunneled at the edges. The forest floor had started to slope downward, steep enough that she was half running, half falling, using trees to keep from completely losing control. Water ran in streams around her feet. A creek? Maybe? Or just the storm's overflow. Then the trees broke. Kaelira skidded to a halt so fast she nearly fell again. She'd burst out of the forest into a clearing. No, not a clearing. A gathering place. Stone markers ringed a central fire pit, each one carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Wolves, dozens of them, in human form, turned to stare at her sudden appearance. And in the center, seated on what could only be described as a throne of carved wood and bone, was the largest man she'd ever seen. Even seated, his presence dominated the space. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, framing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, all hard angles and brutal beauty. Scars traced his jaw and disappeared beneath his black shirt, but it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were the color of winter ice, and when they locked onto her, Kaelira felt something primal in her chest recognize exactly what she was looking at. An apex predator. Well? His voice rolled across the clearing like distant thunder. This is unexpected. The world tilted. Kaelira's legs, which had carried her through 3 days of hell, finally gave out. She collapsed onto her knees in the mud, swaying. Blood and rainwater pooled around her, and through the rushing in her ears she heard the shocked murmurs of the gathered wolves. Is that Ironcrest scent? How did she get past the border? Silence. One word, and every voice cut off like a knife through thread. The man rose from his throne, and Kaelira had to tilt her head back to keep him in view. 6.5 feet, maybe more, built like violence wrapped in flesh. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of something that had never known fear, and Kyalira's instinct screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere left to run to. Behind her, she could hear the Ironcrest hunters crashing through the forest. In front of her stood something infinitely more dangerous. She'd stumbled into an Alpha's gathering. Worse, she'd stumbled into his gathering. Darius Thorne, the Alpha King, the wolf who'd united the northern packs through sheer force of will and strategic brutality. The man whose territory she'd just violated by existing in it. Please. The words scraped out of her throat, barely audible over the storm. Kalira hated the sound of it, hated the begging, the weakness. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Please, Her vision blurred. The world spun sideways, and she realized distantly that she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her face. Strong hands caught her before she hit. The last thing Kalira registered before darkness swallowed her was the scent of pine and smoke, and the rumble of a voice against her ear. I've got you. She woke to warmth. That was wrong. That was so fundamentally wrong that for a long moment Kalira couldn't process it. Warmth meant danger. Warmth meant someone wanted something from her. Warmth came with a price she'd learned to dread. Her eyes snapped open and she lunged upward, only to discover her body had other ideas. Every muscle locked in protest, pain flooding through her in waves that made her gasp. Easy. A hand pressed against her shoulder, not forcing, just steadying. You'll tear the stitches. Kalira's head whipped toward the voice. A woman sat beside the bed, and yes, she was in a bed, an actual bed with soft furs and clean linens, with silver-streaked brown hair and knowing eyes. She looked to be in her 50s, and she held a bowl of something that smelled like herbs and honey. Who? Kalira's voice cracked. She tried again. Where am I? The Alpha King's personal quarters. The woman said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I'm Elena. I've been tending to you for the past day and a half. Day and a half. Kalira's stomach dropped. She'd been unconscious for over 36 hours in enemy territory, helpless, vulnerable. Your former pack came for you, Elena continued, reading her panic with unsettling accuracy. Master Cyrus himself, along with 6 of his enforcers, they demanded your return. She paused, a slight smile tugging at her lips. The Alpha King refused. The words didn't make sense. Kalira stared at her, trying to fit them into any logical framework and failing completely. He... what? Refused, quite definitively, from what I heard. Elena lifted a spoonful of the mixture. Now, you need to eat. You're severely malnourished, dehydrated, and you've lost enough blood that it's a miracle you're conscious at all. Kalira's mind was racing, tripping over itself. Darius Thorne had refused to return her to Ironcrest? That made no sense. She was nobody, less than nobody, a packless wolf with a freakish ability that had made her more curse than blessing. Why would the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories risk conflict over her? I don't understand. She accepted the spoon on autopilot, the warm liquid sliding down her throat. It tasted like honey, and something earthy, immediately settling the nausea she hadn't realized was there. Why would he... The door opened. Kalira's words died as Darius Thorne stepped into the room, and she was struck all over again by the sheer presence of him. In the storm-dark clearing, he'd been terrifying. Here, in the warm light of the room, he was something else entirely. Still dangerous, that would never change, but the danger was leashed, controlled. His winter ice eyes found hers and held. Leave us, he said to Elena, not looking away from Kalira. Elena rose smoothly, gathering her supplies. As she passed Darius, she murmured something too low for Kalira to catch. His jaw tightened fractionally, but he nodded. Then they were alone. Kalira's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct she'd developed under Ironcrest's brutal hierarchy screamed at her to lower her eyes, to make herself small, to show submission before he decided to enforce it. But something stubborn in her chest refused. She'd spent 3 years being beaten down. If he was going to kill her, she'd at least face it head on. Darius crossed to the window, his back to her. What's your name? The question caught her off guard. You don't know? Cyrus called you the Absorber. He seemed to think that was sufficient identification. His tone was flat, unreadable. I'm asking what you call yourself. Kaelira. It felt strange saying her own name out loud. She hadn't been called it in 3 years. Kaelira Voss. He nodded slowly, still not turning around. Tell me about your ability, Kaelira. It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't the commanding snarl she'd learned to expect from alphas. It was something in between, a demand wrapped in the thinnest veneer of choice. She swallowed hard. I can absorb pain, physical, emotional, spiritual, doesn't matter. I take it from others, and she hesitated. This was the part that had made her valuable, the part that had made her a prisoner. And I process it, break it down. It doesn't hurt me the same way it would hurt them. Process it how? I don't know. The admission felt like weakness. It just goes somewhere. Inside. I've never reached a limit. Darius finally turned, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Cyrus claimed you belonged to Ironcrest, that you're bound by pack law. I'm not pack. The words came out harder than she'd intended, 3 years of resentment sharpening them to points. I was never pack. I was property. There's a difference. I agree. He moved closer, and Kaelira forced herself not to flinch, which is why I told him you're under my protection now. The room seemed to tilt again. You... what? You collapsed at my feet during a gathering of the Northern Alphas. Whether you intended it or not, that was a plea for sanctuary. His expression was unreadable. I granted it. Kaelira's mind reeled. Sanctuary, protection. From him, that meant everything. It also meant she'd just become a political chess piece in a game she didn't understand. Why? She didn't realize she'd asked the question out loud until he responded. Because Cyrus deals in slavery and calls it pack structure. Because you ran for 3 days through territory that would kill most wolves, and you didn't stop until your body literally gave out. He paused. And because when you collapsed, you didn't beg me to save you. You begged me to not send you back. Something in her chest cracked at that. A hairline fracture in the walls she'd built. He'd heard her. In that moment of weakness, he'd actually heard what she was asking for. There will be consequences, she managed. Ironcrest won't... Ironcrest can try. The words were soft, but there was iron underneath. Let me worry about politics. You focus on healing. He turned to leave, and Kaelira heard herself say, I can fight. Darius paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. I know you probably think I'm useless, she continued, the words spilling out faster now. But I'm not. I've trained. I can hold my own. And my ability, if you're going to harbor me, you should know what it can actually do. And what can it actually do, Kaelira? She met his eyes. I can take a fatal wound from one of your wolves and survive it. I can absorb poison, disease, curse work. I can drain the pain from 100 injured fighters and keep them in battle when they should be dead. She paused. Cyrus used me as a tool, but I could be a weapon. Something flickered in Darius's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. You're offering your service? I'm offering a trade. You protect me from Ironcrest. I protect your pack from things that would kill them. She lifted her chin. Fair exchange. A long moment passed, then Darius smiled. A small, genuine curve of his mouth that transformed his entire face. We'll discuss terms when you can stand without falling over, he said. For now, rest. Elena will bring you dinner. He left, the door closing with a soft click. Kaelira sank back against the pillows, her heart still racing. What had she just done? Offered herself to another alpha, another pack, another form of servitude? No, this was different. This time she'd made the offer. This time she had leverage. And if Darius Thorne thought he could use her the way Cyrus had, he was going to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between a tool and a weapon. Listen. The first attack came 2 days later. Kaelira was in the training yard against Elena's protests, testing her body's limits. The stitches had come out that morning, the wounds already healing with the accelerated rate common to shifters. She was still weak, still too thin, but strength was returning in increments. She'd just finished a basic combat drill when the shouts started. Breach! North wall! Wolves scattered, some shifting mid-run, others grabbing weapons from the armory. Kaelira's body moved on instinct, following the crowd toward the commotion. The north wall was chaos. A section of the wooden palisade had been blown inward, explosives from the char marks, and through the gap poured Ironcrest fighters. She recognized Garrett at the front, his face twisted with rage. There, he pointed straight at her. The absorber. Take her. 3 wolves peeled off and rushed her. Kalira dropped into a fighting stance, her pulse thundering. She was unarmed, still healing, and facing 3 full-strength fighters. The first one reached her and swung. She ducked under his arm, drove her elbow into his ribs, and used his momentum to throw him into the second attacker. They went down in a tangle. The third was smarter. He feinted left, then came in low, aiming for her legs. Kalira tried to dodge, but her weakened body was too slow. His shoulder hit her midsection, and they both crashed to the ground. Pain exploded across her back where she hit the packed earth. The wolf's hand closed around her throat, squeezing. "Got you, freak," he snarled. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her hands scrabbled at his grip, finding no purchase. Somewhere distant, she heard more fighting, heard Darius's voice roaring commands. Her ability flared to life without conscious thought. The wolf's pain, old injuries, chronic aches, the strain of his shifted form, flowed into her like water finding a crack. His eyes widened in shock as she absorbed it all, processing 3 years of accumulated damage in seconds. The relief made his grip loosen just enough. Kalira drove her knee up between his legs with every ounce of strength she had left. He folded with a wheeze, and she shoved him off, gasping for air. Her throat throbbed where he'd choked her, and she could feel bruises already forming. A hand appeared in her vision, large, scarred, familiar. Darius hauled her to her feet with one smooth motion. Blood spattered his face, and his eyes burned with lethal focus. "Can you stand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Stay behind me." What happened next was brutal efficiency incarnate. Darius moved through the Iron Crest fighters like a force of nature, each strike precise and devastating. He didn't waste energy on showmanship, he simply ended threats. Within minutes, the attack was over. The surviving Iron Crest wolves fled back through the breach in the wall, dragging their wounded. Garrett shot Kalira one last hate-filled look before disappearing into the forest. Darius turned to his own fighters, already barking orders. "Secure the perimeter. I want patrols doubled and—" He stopped, his nostrils flaring. His head snapped toward Kalira. "You're bleeding." She looked down. Her shirt was torn, and blood seeped from a gash along her ribs she didn't remember getting. "It's not bad." "Elena!" Darius called, and the healer appeared as if summoned. "Take her to the medical wing." "I can walk," Kalira protested, even as her knees wobbled. "You can barely stand." His tone brooked no argument. "Elena, now!" As the healer led her away, Kalira glanced back. Darius was surveying the damage, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes tracked her until she disappeared from view. That night, Kalira couldn't sleep. She lay in the too-soft bed in the Alpha King's quarters, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. The attack had been a statement. Iron Crest wasn't going to let her go quietly. And every day she stayed here, she painted a larger target on Darius's pack. The smart thing would be to run again. Disappear into the wilderness, find some remote corner where neither pack could reach her. The thought made her feel hollow. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened and Darius stepped in, carrying a tray. "You didn't eat dinner," he said, setting it on the side table. "Elena mentioned you might be experiencing shock." Kalira pushed herself up. "I'm fine. You were attacked today. Nearly killed." "Fine" is a generous assessment. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, his large frame somehow making the furniture look small. "Eat." It wasn't a suggestion. Kalira picked up the bowl, stew, rich and still steaming, and took a spoonful. The warmth spread through her chest. "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Darius regarded her steadily. "Doing what?" "This. Any of this." She gestured vaguely. "You don't know me. I'm not your pack. I'm a liability that just got your wall blown up, and 3 of your fighters injured. You should cut your losses and what? Throw you back to Cyrus?" His voice was calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Let him continue using you as a tool for his power games? It would be easier, for you." "Easier isn't always right." He leaned back, studying her. "You want to know the truth? When you collapsed at my feet, I saw someone who had fought for 3 days straight to escape hell. Someone who chose potential death over certain slavery. That kind of will is rare, Kalira, And I don't throw away rare things. Something in her chest twisted at his words. You don't know what I did? An Iron Crest. The things Cyrus made me, I know he used you to absorb pain from his fighters, letting them train beyond safe limits. I know he rented your ability to other packs for profit. I know he kept you in a cell and called it protection. Darius's tone was matter of fact, but anger simmered underneath. None of that is your shame to carry. Kalira's throat tightened. She'd spent 3 years believing she was complicit in her own imprisonment, that her survival made her guilty. Hearing someone else say otherwise felt like a key turning in a lock she'd thought was permanently sealed. Iron Crest won't stop, she managed. Today was just the beginning. I know. He stood, and for a moment he looked tired, the weight of leadership showing in the set of his shoulders. Get some sleep, Kalira. Tomorrow, we start preparing for war. After he left, Kalira finished the stew in silence. War. Because of her. Because one alpha had decided she was worth protecting. She didn't sleep. But for the first time in 3 years, lying in the darkness, she felt something that might have been hope. The War Council gathered at dawn. Kalira hadn't been invited, but she went anyway. She'd learned under Ironcrest that information was survival, and she wasn't about to sit meekly in her room while others decided her fate. She slipped into the Great Hall as discussions were already underway, keeping to the shadows. The room was full of Darius's top wolves, his beta, his enforcers, his strategists. They stood around a massive table covered in maps. Can't sustain a prolonged siege, a grizzled wolf was saying. Ironcrest has numbers. We have skill, but we have something they don't, Darius interrupted, his finger tracing a path on the map. We have territory they have to cross to reach us, and we have the alliance with Silver Peak and Stoneheart packs, both of which will demand concessions, his beta, a sharp-eyed woman named Morgan, pointed out. Alliance isn't free, especially not against Ironcrest. I'm aware. Darius's tone was dry, which is why he stopped mid-sentence, his head turning unerringly toward Kalira's hiding spot. You might as well join us properly since you're already here. Every head in the room swiveled toward her. Kalira stepped out of the shadows, refusing to let her discomfort show. I thought I should understand what I've dragged you into. Practical, Morgan said, looking her up and down with frank assessment. You're the absorber? Kalira, she corrected, meeting the beta's eyes. My name is Kalira. Something that might have been approval flickered across Morgan's face. Kalira, then. Can you actually do what Cyrus claimed? Absorb fatal wounds? Yes. Prove it. Before Kalira could respond, Darius's voice cut across the room like a blade. Morgan. It's a fair question, the beta countered. If we're going to war partially over her ability, we should know its limits. Darius's jaw tightened, but Kalira spoke before the argument could escalate. She's right. You should know. She crossed to the table, hyper-aware of every eye tracking her movement. Her hands were steady as she picked up one of the daggers lying among the maps. The blade gleamed in the morning light. Kalira, Darius started. She didn't let him finish. In one smooth motion, she drove the dagger through her left palm. Pain exploded up her arm, white-hot and absolute. Blood welled around the blade, dripping onto the map. But even as the initial shock hit, her ability activated. The pain dissolved, flowing into that vast interior space where she'd stored 3 years of accumulated suffering. The wound remained, blood still flowing, flesh still pierced, but the agony of it became distant, manageable. The room was silent. Kalira pulled the dagger out and held up her hand, showing the hole through her palm that should have had her screaming. Blood ran down her wrist. This would incapacitate a normal wolf. I can function through it. Give me an hour and it'll be mostly healed. She set the bloody dagger back on the table. That's what I can do. Now you know. Morgan stared at her with something like awe. How much can you absorb before it affects you? I don't know. I've never reached my limit. Kalira wrapped her bleeding hand in a cloth someone thrust at her. Cyrus used me for 3 years straight, daily sessions, sometimes multiple per day. I never broke. But the pain has to go somewhere, another wolf spoke up. What happens to it? That was the question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. It stores. Inside. I can feel it there, like a... She struggled for the right words. Like a reservoir. But it's never affected me physically. Darius had been watching her with an unreadable expression. Now he spoke, his voice quiet. And you're offering this ability to us. I'm offering you a weapon Ironcrest is terrified of losing, she corrected. Use it wisely. The rest of the council session was a blur of strategic planning. Kalira contributed where she could, offering insights into Ironcrest's tactics and Cyrus's patterns. But her hand throbbed, a distant pain but persistent, and exhaustion was creeping back in. When Darius finally dismissed everyone, she was the last to leave. His voice stopped her at the door. That was foolish. She turned back. That was necessary. You could have just told them. Words are easy. Pain is truth. She met his winter ice eyes. Now they know what I'm worth. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. For a moment she thought he might be angry, might enforce the dominance she'd just challenged by acting without permission. Instead, he took her injured hand gently, so gently it startled her, and unwrapped the cloth. The wound had already started to close, new tissue knitting across the hole, but it was still ugly, still fresh enough to make most people wince. Darius's thumb traced the edge of the healing skin, his touch careful. Your worth isn't measured in how much pain you can endure, Kalira. The words hit something deep in her chest, some wounded place she'd thought was beyond reach. Then what is it measured in? He released her hand, but his eyes held hers. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you this, it's not what Cyrus taught you. He left her standing there, her hand still tingling from his touch, her mind racing with possibilities she'd thought long dead. For the first time in 3 years, Kalira Voss allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain. It was terrifying. It was also the beginning of everything. The mistrust started small, whispers in hallways, conversations that died when she approached. Kalira noticed it all, cataloged it the way she'd learned to survive in Ironcrest. By reading the room before the room decided to read her. She was in the communal kitchen 3 days after the council meeting when she overheard the first open complaint. Don't care what the Alpha says, she's Ironcrest. You don't just stop being what you are. The voice belonged to a young enforcer named Derek, his tone sharp with conviction. She ran from them. Another voice countered, female, uncertain. Or she's a plant. Think about it, Sarah. Perfect timing, perfect sob story, and now we're mobilizing for war? Cyrus isn't stupid. Kalira's hand tightened on the mug of tea she'd been preparing. She could walk away, pretend she hadn't heard. That would be the smart move, the safe move. Instead, she stepped into view. Both wolves froze. Derek's face flushed, but he didn't look away. She'd give him credit for that much. Sarah, a slight woman with nervous eyes, took a half step back. You think I'm a spy, Kalira said flatly. Not a question. Derek's jaw set. I think it's convenient. We're supposed to believe you just happened to stumble into the Alpha King's gathering, that Cyrus would let his most valuable asset escape. I slit my handler's throat and ran for 3 days through territory that should have killed me twice over. There was nothing convenient about it. She set her mug down carefully, fighting to keep her voice level. And if I were Cyrus's plant, I'm doing a terrible job. All I've done is bleed on your maps and warn you about attack patterns. Words are cheap, Derek shot back. For all we know, those warnings are designed to... Enough! Morgan's voice cut through the kitchen like a whip. The beta stepped into view, her expression carved from ice. Derek, unless you've developed strategic expertise overnight, I suggest you leave threat assessment to those qualified to make it. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. He gave a stiff nod and left. Sarah scurrying after him. Morgan turned to Kalira, her sharp eyes assessing. That's going to happen more. You prepared for it? Does it matter if I am? No. Morgan moved to pour her own tea, movements economical. But it'll be easier if you stop trying to prove yourself to every idiot with an opinion. You've already proven yourself where it counts. To who? Darius? Kalira couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. His protection only goes so far. If the pack doesn't accept me, the pack will follow where their alpha leads. They always do. Morgan took a sip, considering. But you're right that trust isn't automatic. They need to see you're committed, that you're not going to run at the first sign of trouble. I ran from Ironcrest. Everyone knows that. You ran from slavery. That's different. The beta set her mug down. Running from this would mean abandoning the only protection standing between you and Cyrus. They know you're smart enough to recognize that equation. It was pragmatic, cold, and completely accurate. Kaylira found herself almost liking Morgan for the brutal honesty. So what do I do? You keep showing up. You train, you contribute, you make yourself useful. And when the next attack comes, because it will come, you prove Derek and everyone like him wrong. Morgan headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a spy. Spies don't stab themselves through the hand to make a point. She left Kaylira alone in the kitchen, the tea cooling in her hands and Derek's words echoing in her mind. Perfect timing, perfect sob story. What if he was right? Not about her being a plant, but about Cyrus's plan. What if her escape had been allowed, controlled, designed to lead her exactly here? What if everything she thought was freedom was just a longer leash? The thought made her stomach turn. Training became her refuge. Every morning before dawn, Kaylira was in the yard, pushing her recovering body through combat drills. The physical exhaustion was cleansing, a pain she chose rather than one inflicted on her. And slowly, grudgingly, other wolves began joining her sessions. It started with Morgan, who fought with brutal efficiency that left Kaylira bruised and gasping. Then came a few of the younger enforcers, curious about the absorber's actual skill. Within a week, she had a regular sparring group. Darius watched sometimes, a silent presence at the edge of the yard. He never interfered, never offered commentary. But Kaylira felt his gaze like a physical weight, and she found herself fighting harder when he was there. On the 8th day, he finally stepped into the ring. Again, he said simply, after watching her spar with 3 opponents simultaneously. Kaylira straightened, breathing hard. What? You pulled that last strike. Against the one on your left. You had an opening, and you hesitated. He moved into the center of the training circle, and the other wolves scattered to the edges. Show me why. Her pulse kicked up. Sparring with Darius Thorne was not the same as sparring with his enforcers. This was an alpha in his prime, a wolf who'd earned his position through combat, not politics. He's young, she said. Broke his collarbone 6 months ago. It hasn't fully healed. If I'd hit him there, he'd have learned a valuable lesson about protecting weaknesses. Darius tilted his head. You absorbed his pain, didn't you? In that split second, you read his injury and adjusted. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. Don't. His tone was flat, commanding. In a real fight, that hesitation gets you killed. You can't save everyone, Kaylira. Sometimes you have to choose yourself. The words stung because they were true, and because every instinct she'd developed under Cyrus had been about minimizing harm to others, even at her own expense. I'm not trying to save anyone, she said, voice harder than intended. I'm trying not to be what Cyrus made me. A weapon that doesn't think, doesn't question, just executes. Something shifted in Darius's expression. Then fight me like I'm the enemy. No holding back, no mercy. Show me the weapon, and show me the woman who controls it. He moved. Kaylira barely got her guard up in time. His first strike was testing, probing her defenses. She blocked and countered, aiming for his ribs. He deflected effortlessly and swept her legs. She hit the ground hard, rolled, came up already moving. Her ability flared instinctively, reading his body. Old injuries from 100 battles, the slight favor of his right knee, the tension in his shoulders from too many nights without proper sleep. All weaknesses she could exploit. All weaknesses she didn't want to use. Stop thinking, Darius growled, pressing the attack. React. His fist caught her shoulder, and she spun with the impact, using momentum to drive her elbow toward his face. He blocked, but it forced him back a step. She pressed forward, abandoning defense for pure aggression. For 30 seconds they traded blows, neither giving ground. Kaylira's world narrowed to breath and movement, to the dance of violence she'd learned in Ironcrest's brutal training pits. Her body knew this language, even if her mind recoiled from it. Then Darius's hand closed around her wrist, gentle but immovable. There, he said quietly. That's what I wanted to see. Kaylira realized she was shaking, adrenaline crashing through her system. The wolves watching had gone completely silent. You're faster than you think, Darius continued, releasing her wrist. And your ability gives you an edge most fighters never develop. You can read your opponent's body like a map. Use it, not to protect them, to win. He stepped back, addressing the whole yard now. Anyone who thinks the absorber is a liability, you're welcome to test that theory. Form a line. No one moved. Darius's smile was sharp. That's what I thought. He left Kaelira standing in the center of the ring, her heart hammering and her perspective fundamentally shifted. He'd just publicly endorsed her skill, turned her from questionable asset to recognized fighter. It was also a challenge to stop hiding behind Mercy and embrace what she could actually do. Later, in the washhouse, Morgan cornered her. That was well played. Kaelira scrubbed dirt from her arms, not meeting the beta's eyes. I didn't play anything. No, but Darius did. Morgan leaned against the doorframe. He just made it impossible for anyone to question your combat value without questioning his judgment. Smart. Or he actually thinks I'm worth training. Both can be true. Morgan's expression softened slightly. He doesn't waste time on wolves he doesn't see potential in, Kaelira. Take the win. But as Kaelira lay in bed that night, sleep evasive as always, she wondered what potential Darius actually saw. A fighter? A weapon? Or something else entirely, something she couldn't identify because she'd never been allowed to be it? The second attack came 9 days after the first, and it was surgical. No explosions this time, no frontal assault. Instead, Ironcrest sent a team of 5 in the dead of night, over the east wall where patrols were thinnest. They had a specific target. Kaelira woke to the sound of breaking glass. Her body reacted before her mind fully engaged, rolling out of bed and grabbing the knife she'd started keeping under her pillow. The door to her room, still in Darius's personal quarters, a fact that hadn't escaped the pack's notice, was intact. The window, however, was shattered. A figure in black dropped through, landing in a crouch, then another, then 3 more. 5 trained killers, and she was alone in a nightgown with a single blade. The lead attacker pulled back his hood. Marcus. One of Cyrus's personal guard, a wolf she'd seen torture information out of prisoners with methodical precision. Hello, little absorber, he said softly. Master Cyrus sends his regards, and a message. Come quietly, and the Alpha King's pack doesn't have to burn. Kaelira's grip tightened on the knife. I'm not going anywhere with you. We hoped you'd say that. Marcus smiled, and it was a terrible thing. Makes this more fun. They came at her all at once. Kaelira dove under the first attacker's grab, slashed at the second's leg. Her blade connected and blood sprayed, but there were too many. A fist caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs. She absorbed the pain automatically, converting it to fuel, but the impact still sent her crashing into the wall. She grabbed a broken shard of window glass and drove it into the nearest attacker's eye. His scream brought the others crashing through her door, Darius's wolves alerted by the noise. But Marcus had already grabbed her, his arm locked around her throat, using her as a shield. Back off, he snarled at the enforcers crowding the doorway, or I crush her windpipe. The pressure on her throat was immediate and brutal. Kaelira's vision started to tunnel, but she forced her ability into overdrive, absorbing the pain of asphyxiation, staying conscious when she should have blacked out. Her hand still held the glass shard. She drove it backward into Marcus's thigh, twisting. He howled and his grip loosened just enough. Kaelira dropped, rolled, and came up as Darius exploded into the room like a force of nature. What happened next was carnage. Swift, brutal, definitive. Within seconds, 3 of the attackers were dead or incapacitated. Marcus and 1 other managed to retreat through the window, disappearing into the night. Darius turned to Kaelira, his eyes blazing. Are you hurt? No. The lie came automatically. Her throat was on fire, her ribs screaming, but she'd absorbed most of the pain. I'm fine. His gaze raked over her, the blood on her nightgown, not all hers, the glass cuts on her hands, the bruises already forming on her throat. That is not fine. They were after me specifically. She pushed to her feet, ignoring her body's protests. Marcus said Cyrus wants me back. He threatened to burn the pack if I don't. I heard. Darius's voice was cold fury barely leashed, and his threat means nothing. It means everything. The words burst out of her, 3 weeks of tension finally breaking. Don't you understand? They're going to keep coming. They'll keep attacking, keep killing your wolves, until either I'm dead or back in Ironcrest. Cyrus doesn't make idle threats. Neither do I. Darius stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. I said you're under my protection. That doesn't change because he escalates. It should. Kaelira's hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. I'm one wolf. You're risking an entire pack for what's right. He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. You think I don't know what Cyrus is doing? He's counting on you to run. He's counting on guilt and fear to drive you back into his hands. Every attack is designed to make you feel responsible for the blood spilled. The accuracy of it struck her like a physical blow. Because yes, she did feel responsible. Every injury to Darius's wolves, every attack, every threat, it all fed into the familiar narrative that she was the problem, the curse, the thing that brought destruction. Don't let him win, Darius said quietly. Don't let him turn you into a weapon against yourself. Kalira's throat tightened, and not from Marcus's chokehold. What if I can't stop him? Then you're not as strong as I think you are. He released her shoulders, but didn't step back. And I think you're strong enough to burn his whole world down if he pushes you far enough. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Kalira wasn't ready to examine. A knock at the door frame broke the moment. Morgan stood there, her expression grim. We captured one of the attackers. He's asking to speak with the Alpha King, says he has a message from Cyrus. Darius's jaw tightened. Bring him to the hall, and wake the council. If Cyrus wants to negotiate, he'll do it in front of witnesses. So, the captured Ironcrest wolf was barely more than a boy, 19, maybe 20. They'd bound him to a chair in the great hall, and blood dripped from a gash on his forehead. But his eyes were steady as Darius's council assembled. Speak, Darius commanded, his voice echoing off stone walls. The boy swallowed hard. Master Cyrus offers terms. Return the absorber within 3 days, and he'll consider the matter of her escape an internal issue. No further retaliation against your pack. And if we refuse, Morgan asked from Darius's right, then he brings the full weight of Ironcrest down on you, along with every pack he has alliance with. The boy's gaze flicked to Kalira, who stood in the shadows near the back. He says to tell the absorber specifically, there is no freedom. There's only the illusion of choice before the inevitable. Kalira's stomach turned. That was pure Cyrus. The psychological blade twisted just right to make her doubt everything. Interesting, Darius said, his tone conversational. And what does Cyrus offer in return for avoiding this war? The boy blinked, clearly not expecting the question. He offers peace, continued trade relations, a return to... No, Darius cut him off. I mean, what does he offer me personally? Because if I'm going to betray a wolf under my protection, hand her over to a master who enslaved and exploited her, I'd expect significant compensation. So, what's on the table? The hall went silent. Even the boy looked confused. Master Cyrus assumed... Your master assumed wrong. Darius leaned forward. Here are my terms. Cyrus publicly releases any claim to Kalira Voss. He pays reparations for the damage his attacks have caused to my territory, and he sends a formal apology for violating the sanctuary protocols of an alpha gathering. He paused. Those are the conditions for peace. The boy's face went white. He'll never agree to that. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Darius gestured to the guards. Release him. Let him carry my message back. As they untied the boy and escorted him out, Kalira felt every eye in the hall turn to her. She kept her expression neutral, but inside panic was clawing its way up her throat. Darius had just declared war. Over her. The council erupted into arguments the moment the door closed. Voices overlapped, rising in volume and intensity. Complete madness. We don't have the resources. Ironcrest has been looking for an excuse to expand anyway. This just... One wolf. We're going to war over one wolf who might not even... Enough! Darius's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. I've made my decision. We prepare for conflict. With respect, Alpha, an older wolf named Thomas spoke up. The pack has a right to question whether this is about protection or something else. The implication hung heavy in the air. Kalira felt her face heat, but Darius's expression remained carved from stone. Question all you like, Thomas, but understand this. Ironcrest operates on fear and exploitation. They enslave wolves with valuable abilities and call it pack loyalty. If I hand Kalira back, I'm endorsing that system. I'm telling every wolf in the Northern Territories that power is the only thing that matters, that justice is negotiable. His gaze swept the room. Is that the legacy you want for this pack? No one answered. Dismissed, Darius said finally. We reconvene at dawn for battle planning. The council filed out, leaving Kalira alone with Darius and Morgan. The beta regarded her alpha with something like exasperation. That was the most politically expensive decision you've made in 5 years, Morgan said flatly. Probably. Darius didn't sound particularly concerned. Half the pack thinks you've lost your mind. The other half thinks you're... She trailed off, glancing at Kalira. Say it, Darius commanded, compromised by your feelings for her. Kalira's breath caught. She started to protest, to say there were no feelings, this was just protection, just politics. But Darius spoke first. My feelings are irrelevant. The principle stands. Morgan snorted. Keep telling yourself that. She headed for the door, pausing to address Kalira directly. For what it's worth, I think he's right. About the principle, and about you being worth the fight. But people are going to die. You should prepare yourself for that wait. After she left, silence stretched between Kalira and Darius. Finally, Kalira found her voice. You should reconsider. No. Darius. Kalira. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his winter ice eyes made her breath stutter. Do you want to go back to Ironcrest? Of course not, but then stop arguing for it. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. I know what you're doing. You're trying to make the choice for me. Trying to absolve me of responsibility by offering yourself up as sacrifice. It won't work. She flinched at the accuracy. People are going to die because of me. People are going to die because Cyrus is a tyrant who can't accept losing control. His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. The difference matters. What, does it? When the bodies start piling up, will the reason why make them any less dead? No. The honesty was brutal. But it will make the fight meaningful. There are things worth dying for, Kalira. Freedom is one of them. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, and she blinked them away furiously. She would not cry. She'd cried enough in Ironcrest cells to last a lifetime. I don't know how to be worth this, she whispered. Darius's expression softened fractionally. You already are. You just don't see it yet. He left her standing in the great hall, moonlight streaming through the high windows, and Kalira felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about escaping Cyrus's control. This was about choosing, actively, consciously choosing what kind of wolf she wanted to be. The thought was terrifying and liberating and absolutely, impossibly fragile. What? The next morning, Kalira made her own choice. She found Morgan in the armory, cataloging weapons. I want to fight. The beta didn't look up from her inventory. You already train with us. No, I mean when Ironcrest comes, I want to be on the front lines, not hidden away like some precious asset. Kalira planted her hands on the table. Use me. Actually use me. Now Morgan looked up, interest sharp in her eyes. You understand what you're asking? Front line means first contact. Means you'll be absorbing injuries from our fighters while engaging the enemy simultaneously. I know. You could die. Very easily. I could die in my room too. Marcus proved that. Kalira met her gaze steadily. At least this way, I'm useful. At least this way, I'm choosing. Morgan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll talk to Darius. But if he approves this, you follow my orders without question. Clear? Clear? Good. The beta returned to her work. You might actually survive this after all. Darius didn't approve immediately. When Morgan brought him Kalira's request that afternoon, his reaction was predictable. Absolutely not. They were in his private study, and Kalira had insisted on being present for the conversation. Now she watched him pace, his agitation barely controlled. She has valid points, Morgan argued. We're already planning to use her ability in a support capacity. This just puts her where she can be most effective. It puts her directly in Cyrus's line of fire. Darius stopped, pinning Kalira with a look. That's what you want? To make yourself the biggest target possible? I want to stop hiding. The words came out fiercer than intended. Every attack, every strategy session, everyone talks around me like I'm a thing to be protected instead of a person who can contribute. I'm tired of it. You've been here 3 weeks. You're still recovering from... I'm fine. She pushed to her feet, facing him directly. You told me yesterday there are things worth dying for. Let me prove I believe that. Something flickered across his face, pride maybe, or fear. This isn't about proving anything. Yes, it is. Kalira stepped closer. It's about proving I'm not what Cyrus made me. It's about proving I can be more than a victim or a weapon, and it's about proving to your pack that I'm worth the risk you're taking. I don't need you to prove that. But they do. She gestured vaguely toward the walls, toward the pack beyond. Half of them think I'm a liability. The other half think you're compromised. Let me show them both they're wrong. Morgan watched the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. She's not wrong, Alpha. Darius's jaw worked. For a long moment, he just stared at Kylira, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. The Alpha who wanted to protect versus the leader who needed to trust his wolves to make their own choices. Finally, he spoke. If I allow this, and that's if, you follow Morgan's orders exactly. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. You absorb what's needed to keep our fighters standing, and you retreat if the situation becomes untenable. Agreed. And you wear armor, proper armor, fitted correctly. Fine. His eyes narrowed. You're agreeing too easily. Because you're right. Kylira managed a small smile. I'm not trying to be a martyr. I'm trying to be useful. There's a difference. Darius looked to Morgan, who shrugged. I'll keep her alive? Probably. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. The beta headed for the door. I'll start her tactical training tomorrow. We've got 4 days until Cyrus's deadline. Should be enough time to teach her not to get herself killed immediately. After Morgan left, Darius moved to the window, his back to Kylira. You're going to get hurt. I've been hurt before. That's not a comfort. Kylira crossed to stand beside him, looking out at the compound below. Wolves moved through the yard, preparing for war. Her war, whether she'd wanted it or not. Why does it matter? She asked quietly. Whether I get hurt, you barely know me. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I know you ran for 3 days through hell rather than accept slavery. I know you stabbed yourself through the hand to prove a point. I know you're brave enough to be terrified and still keep moving forward. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her chest tight. That's enough. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to address. Kylira's pulse hammered in her throat. Darius, don't. His voice was rough. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not now. Not when we're 4 days from a battle that could destroy everything. He was right. This, whatever this was building between them, was a complication neither could afford. And yet Kylira found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The door burst open and a young wolf skidded to a halt, eyes wide. Alpha! There's someone at the gates, asking for sanctuary. Darius's entire demeanor shifted, Alpha rising to the surface. Who? A wolf from Iron Crest. The messenger swallowed hard. She says she has information about Cyrus's attack plans, and she says she knows the absorber. Kylira's blood ran cold, because there was only one wolf in Ironcrest who would take that risk, who would know her well enough to use her as leverage. Sarah, she breathed. Her sister had found her, and if Sarah was here, everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. Kylira was already moving before Darius could respond, her feet carrying her toward the gates like they had a mind of their own. Behind her, she heard him curse and follow, but she didn't slow down. Sarah, her sister. The only person in Ironcrest who'd shown her any kindness, who'd smuggled her extra food when Cyrus cut her rations, who'd whispered encouragement through the cell bars on the worst nights. The gates were surrounded by armed guards, their weapons trained on a slight figure standing just outside the threshold. Even from a distance, Kylira recognized the auburn hair, the way Sarah held herself, trying to look brave while everything in her body language screamed terror. Sarah! The name tore out of her throat. Her sister's head snapped up and relief flooded her face. Kay! Thank the spirits, I thought— Stand down, Darius ordered his guards, but they didn't lower their weapons. He came up beside Kylira, his presence solid and commanding. She stays outside until we know why she's here. She's my sister, Kylira said, the words coming automatically even though they felt strange on her tongue. Sister. She hadn't been anyone's sister in 3 years, which makes her an excellent leverage point. Darius's tone was measured, but his eyes tracked Sarah with predatory focus. Morgan, search her, thoroughly. The beta moved forward, and Sarah submitted to the search without protest, her gaze locked on Kylira the whole time. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, and when Morgan pulled a small blade from her boot, Sarah flinched but didn't resist. She's clean otherwise, Morgan announced. No marks of binding magic, No scent of others nearby. "Let her in," Kalira said. "Please." Darius studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded sharply. The gates opened and Sarah stumbled through, nearly collapsing. Kalira caught her, and the contact was a shock. Her sister was thinner than she remembered, trembling with exhaustion. "How long have you been running?" Kalira asked. 2 days, since Cyrus sent the ultimatum." Sarah's voice was hoarse. "Kay, I had to warn you. He's planning—" "Inside," Darius interrupted. "Whatever she has to say, she says it in front of the council." They moved to the great hall, Sarah stumbling between Kalira and Morgan. The council assembled quickly, their expressions ranging from suspicious to hostile. Derek, the enforcer who'd called Kalira a spy, looked vindicated, as if Sarah's arrival proved his point. Sarah stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly. Elena appeared with water and bread, which she accepted with shaking hands. "Speak," Darius commanded. Sarah took a long drink, then met his eyes. "Master Cyrus is coming himself. In 3 days, at dawn. He's bringing 200 fighters, his entire force plus mercenaries from 3 allied packs. But that's not the worst part." Kalira's stomach dropped. "What's the worst part?" "He hired a blood witch. Someone who specializes in binding magic." Sarah's gaze found Kalira's, filled with apology. "He's not planning to negotiate or fight fairly. He's planning to bind you, Kay. Force you back under his control permanently. The kind of binding that can't be broken without killing you." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, sharp with anger and fear. "Blood magic is forbidden. We can't fight that kind of power. Should surrender her now before—" "Silence." Darius's voice cracked like thunder. The room fell quiet. "A blood witch. You're certain?" Sarah nodded miserably. "I heard him talking to her. She arrived yesterday. He's paying her in people, wolves with abilities he's captured. She's going to drain them for power before the attack." Kalira felt bile rise in her throat. Blood witches were rare, outlawed across most territories for good reason. They used life force as fuel, consuming others to enhance their own magic, and a binding created by one would be absolute. It would strip her of free will entirely, turn her into a puppet wearing her own skin. Death would be kinder. "Why are you telling us this?" Thomas asked, his tone skeptical. "Why betray your own pack?" "Because it's not a pack." Sarah's voice cracked. "It's a prison. And Cyrus has been getting worse, more brutal, more paranoid. After Kay escaped, he started suspecting everyone. He's already executed 3 wolves for treason. I knew I'd be next." "So you're saving yourself," Derek said flatly, "using information as currency." "I'm trying to save my sister." Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face now. "And yes, I'm trying to save myself. Is that so wrong? Would you stay with a master who tortures wolves for entertainment? Who experiments on children? Who treats sentience like it's negotiable?" The raw pain in her voice silenced Derek. Even the most skeptical council members looked uncomfortable. Darius approached Sarah slowly, and she flinched but held her ground. "You understand what you're asking. Sanctuary means swearing loyalty to this pack. It means if Cyrus takes you, you die rather than give up our secrets. It means you might be asked to fight against wolves you've known your whole life." "I understand." Sarah's jaw set. "And I accept. Morgan, take her to a secured room. Food, water, medical attention, but she doesn't leave until I decide her status." Darius watched Sarah be led away, then turned to his counsel. "Thoughts?" "It could be a trap," Thomas said immediately. "Feed us false information, make us overreact or underestimate. Or it could be legitimate intelligence we'd be fools to ignore," Morgan countered. "A blood witch changes everything. We can't fight that conventionally." Kalira's mind was racing, pieces clicking together in a pattern she didn't like. He knew. Every head turned toward her. Cyrus knew Sarah would run, she continued, her voice growing stronger. "He told her about the blood witch deliberately. He wanted her to come here and warn us." "Why?" Darius asked, but his expression suggested he'd already reached the same conclusion. "Because fear is a weapon. He wants us panicking, second-guessing every decision. He wants me specifically to know what's waiting, to spend 3 days imagining the binding, losing sleep, making mistakes." Kalira's hands clenched into fists. "And he wants to divide the pack. Some will think Sarah's telling the truth. Others will think she's bait. Either way, it creates suspicion." That's assuming your sister is complicit, Morgan pointed out. She could be a genuine defector. Or she could be both. Kaelira met Darius's eyes. She could be telling the truth about the Blood Witch and still be serving Cyrus's larger plan. He's good at using people's genuine emotions as cover. The council dissolved into debate again. Kaelira listened with half her attention, the other half focused on the fundamental problem. A Blood Witch changed everything. No amount of combat training or strategic positioning would matter if she got bound. She'd become the weapon Cyrus always wanted, turned against the very pack trying to protect her. There was only one solution she could see, and it was going to destroy her. Later, after the council dispersed and guards were doubled and battle plans hastily revised, Kaelira found her way to the secured room where Sarah waited. 2 guards flanked the door, but they let her pass after a moment's hesitation. Sarah sat on the bed, her face buried in her hands. She looked up when Kaelira entered, hope and fear warring in her expression. "Kate, is it true?" Kaelira cut her off. "About the Blood Witch?" "Yes. Every word." Sarah stood, reaching for her. "I swear on our parents' memory I'm telling the truth." Kaelira didn't move into the embrace. "What did Cyrus promise you?" Sarah's hands dropped. "What?" "To make you do this. To come here and deliver his message wrapped in a defection. What did he promise you?" Her sister's face crumpled. "Kate, no, you can't think I'm— Answer the question." A long silence. Then Sarah's shoulders sagged. "Your freedom. If I delivered the message convincingly enough, if I helped sow chaos in the Alpha King's ranks, he promised he'd let you go. No binding, no pursuit. He'd publicly release his claim." There it was. The truth that hurt worse than any physical wound. "You believed him," Kaelira said flatly. "I had to try." Sarah's voice broke. "You're my sister. You're all I have left. And I thought if I played along, if I gave him what he wanted, maybe you could actually be free." "So you're telling the truth about the Blood Witch, but you're also following his script." Kaelira felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "Sarah, you just helped him weaponize your own love for me." "I know." Tears streamed down Sarah's face now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Kay, the witch is real." "The danger is real. Even if Cyrus used me, that part is true. You have to leave. Tonight. Run as far as you can before— "I'm not running." Sarah stared at her. "You'll die. Or worse, the binding will— "I know what it'll do." Kaelira moved toward the door. "But running just means he wins eventually. Better to face it now, on ground I choose." "That's insane. You're talking about suicide." "No. I'm talking about taking control of the one thing Cyrus never counted on." Kaelira paused at the threshold, looking back at her sister. "Me, choosing to fight back." She left before Sarah could respond, the guards closing the door behind her. Her hands were shaking and her mind felt too loud, thoughts crashing over each other in waves. But underneath the chaos, a plan was forming. Dangerous. Probably impossible. Definitely her only shot. She found Darius in the training yard, working through combat forms with a ferocity that suggested he was trying to punch his way through his own thoughts. He stopped when he saw her approach, sweat gleaming on his skin in the torchlight. "Your sister's story checks out," he said without preamble. "We sent scouts to verify. They saw evidence of a large force gathering in Ironcrest territory, and there's a scent signature that matches blood magic." Kaelira nodded. She'd expected as much. "I have a plan." His eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." "The Blood Witch needs physical contact to create the binding, which means she has to get close to me during the battle." Kaelira forced herself to maintain eye contact, to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "So we let her." "Absolutely not." "Wait, listen." She stepped closer. "We let her get close, let her think she's succeeded, but before she completes the binding, I use my ability in reverse." Darius went very still. "Explain." "I've always absorbed pain inward, taken it from others and stored it, but energy flows both directions. If I can push it outward instead, release everything I've accumulated over 3 years," she swallowed hard, "it would be catastrophic. For me, and for anyone in the immediate radius." "You're talking about turning yourself into a bomb." "I'm talking about turning myself into a weapon Cyrus won't see coming. The Blood Witch will be focused on binding me. She won't expect me to attack from the inside out." Darius's expression was carved from stone. And what happens to you when you release that much stored pain? I don't know. The honesty felt important. Best case, I burn through my reserves and survive. Worst case, she didn't finish the sentence. Worst case, you die. Or destroy yourself so completely there's nothing left to save. His voice was low, dangerous. No, it's not your choice. The hell it isn't. You're under my protection, which means you gave me the right to decide my own path. The words came out louder than intended, echoing across the empty yard. You told me I was worth the fight, that freedom was worth dying for. Did you mean that, or was it just pretty words? Darius closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his presence overwhelming. You think I want you to die for a principle? I think you want me to live as myself, not as Cyrus's puppet. And if the binding succeeds, I won't be myself anymore. I'll just be a weapon wearing my face. Kaelira's voice cracked despite her best efforts. At least this way, I go out fighting. At least this way, it means something. For a long moment they stood there, tension crackling between them like lightning waiting to strike. Then Darius's hand came up, his fingers brushing her jaw with unexpected gentleness. There has to be another way, he said, and there was something raw in his voice she'd never heard before. If you find one, I'll take it. But Darius, she leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. We have less than 3 days, and I'd rather have a bad plan than no plan at all. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and the tenderness of it was almost painful. You're asking me to watch you destroy yourself. I'm asking you to trust me, to believe I'm strong enough to survive what's coming. I do believe that. I'm just not sure I'm strong enough to let you try. The vulnerability in his admission hit her harder than any attack. This terrifying, powerful alpha who commanded absolute loyalty was admitting to fear. For her. Kaelara reached up, covering his hand with hers. Then we survive together. Or we don't survive at all. But we do it choosing, not because Cyrus forced us. Something shifted in his expression. Acceptance, maybe, or the kind of reckless courage that came from having no good options. If we do this, we do it right. Controlled conditions, safety measures in place. You're not going into this blind. Agreed. And if I see a better option before the battle starts, then we take it, she finished. I'm not married to dying, Darius. I'm just refusing to live as someone's property ever again. He pulled her into his arms then, the hug fierce and brief. Against her ear, he murmured, You're going to give me white hair before this is over. You'd look distinguished with white hair. He huffed a sound that might have been a laugh and released her. Come on, if we're planning a controlled detonation of accumulated pain, we need Elena's expertise. They found the healer in her workroom, surrounded by herbs and medical texts. When they explained what Kaelira was proposing, Elena's face went through several shades of pale before settling on grim determination. Theoretically possible, she said slowly, pulling out a thick tome. There are documented cases of pain absorbers releasing stored energy in moments of extreme duress, but never deliberately, and never with any real control over the outcome. What happened to them? Kaelira asked. Elena hesitated. Most died. The ones who survived were damaged, mentally, physically, spiritually. The human mind isn't designed to process that much pain at once, even in release. So we're talking about permanent harm even in the best-case scenario. Yes, the healer met her eyes steadily, but staying conscious and directing the release might be possible if we can find a way to ground the energy. Channel it through something other than just your body. Darius leaned over the book. What kind of grounding? Metal conducts energy well. Silver specifically has properties that interact with magical workings. Elena tapped the page thoughtfully. If Kaelira were wearing silver at contact points, wrists, throat, temples, it might provide a release valve, prevent the energy from shredding her from the inside out. Might, Kaelira repeated. This is experimental magic based on theoretical applications. Might is the best I can offer. Elena closed the book with a heavy thump. But it's better than nothing, and I can prepare you. There are breathing techniques, meditation practices that help pain workers manage overwhelming stimuli. It's not much, but it's more than I had an hour ago, Kaelira interrupted. Show me. They spent the next 3 hours in Elena's workroom, Kaelira learning techniques she'd never been taught during her time in Ironcrest. Cyrus had wanted her to absorb pain reflexively, without conscious control. But Elena taught her to recognize the flow of energy, to feel it moving through her internal landscape like water through channels. Your ability isn't passive, Elena explained. It's active management. You've been treating stored pain like static weight, but it's actually dynamic energy. Learning to direct it is the key. By the time they finished, Kaelira's head throbbed and her body felt wrung out. But she could sense the reservoir inside her now, vast and dark and full of 3 years of accumulated suffering. It was terrifying. It was also powerful. Darius walked her back to her quarters, the compound quiet around them. Tomorrow, preparations would accelerate. The pack would arm for war, strategy would be refined, and everyone would move through their tasks with the grim focus of wolves who knew death was coming. "Get some sleep," Darius said at her door. "Like that's happening." But Kaelira managed a tired smile. "You either." "Probably not." He hesitated, then, "What you said earlier about going out fighting, I need you to know you're not dying on my watch if I have anything to say about it." "Then we'd better make sure we both have something to say about it when the time comes." He left, and Kaelira entered her room alone. But sleep, as predicted, was impossible. She lay in the darkness, feeling the weight of stored pain inside her like a second heartbeat. Tomorrow, Elena would fit her with the silver grounding pieces. The day after, final preparations. And then Dawn would bring Cyrus and his army and a blood witch who wanted to steal her soul. She thought about running. It would be easy. Slip out in the night, disappear into the wilderness again. Cyrus would follow, but at least Darius's pack would be safe. But she'd tried running once already. And it had led her here, to a choice she'd never imagined having: die free or live enslaved. Not much of a choice when you looked at it that way. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to screaming. Kaelira bolted upright, her heart hammering. The screaming was coming from somewhere below in the compound proper. She grabbed her knife and ran for the door, nearly colliding with the guard posted outside. "What's happening?" "Fire! The East Barracks! Someone set a fire." She was running before he finished speaking, joining the surge of wolves rushing toward the flames. The East Barracks housed the youngest fighters, wolves still in training. If someone had targeted them deliberately, the scene was chaos. Fire consumed one wing of the building, and wolves were dragging injured fighters out into the yard. The smell of smoke and burned flesh made Kaelira's stomach heave, but she pushed through, looking for ways to help. A young wolf, couldn't be more than 15, lay on the ground, his leg burned badly. Without thinking, Kaelira dropped beside him and placed her hands on his shoulders. Her ability surged, and she absorbed the pain, pulling it out of him in one long draw. The boy's screams cut off, his eyes rolling with relief even as his body trembled with shock. "Get him to Elena," she ordered the nearest fighter, and moved to the next injured wolf. For the next hour, Kaelira worked her way through the wounded, absorbing pain from burns and smoke inhalation and the trauma of watching their barracks burn. Each time she pulled suffering into herself, her internal reservoir grew heavier. By the time Elena arrived with medical supplies, Kaelira was swaying on her feet. "Stop," the healer commanded. "You're already overextended. They need you functional for the battle, not burned out healing wounds that won't kill them." Elena gripped her arm. "Go. Rest. That's an order." Kaelira wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She stumbled away from the smoke and carnage, finding a quiet corner near the wall. Her hands shook and her skin felt too tight, every nerve ending oversensitized from the absorption work. "Deliberate," Darius's voice cut through her fugue. She looked up to find him standing over her, his face grim in the firelight. The fire was set. We found accelerant marks, and one of the night guards was murdered, throat cut before he could raise the alarm. Ironcrest. Yes, but not another attack. A message. He crouched down to her level. Cyrus is reminding us he can strike whenever and wherever he wants, that we're vulnerable even behind our own walls. Kaelira's jaw clenched. So he's starting the war early. Psychological warfare before the actual battle. Exactly. Darius studied her face. "How many did you absorb from?" "I don't know, 12, 15? The number felt hazy, lost in the blur of pain and panic. "Does it matter?" "It matters if you've compromised your ability to do what you're planning in 2 days." But there was no accusation in his tone, just weary concern. "Can you still function?" Kaelira did a mental inventory. The reservoir was fuller than it had been, but not unmanageably so. And the new pain had a different quality, sharp and immediate, unlike the deep chronic suffering from Ironcrest. It sat differently in her internal landscape. "I'm fine," she said, and this time it was mostly true. "Then come with me. There's something you need to see." He led her to the great hall, where Morgan and Thomas stood over a map. Sarah was there too, flanked by guards, her expression devastated. "Tell her what you told us," Darius commanded. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "The fire was my fault. The information I carried, Cyrus planted details about guard rotations and shift changes. He knew his agents would be listening when I debriefed. I gave them everything they needed to strike without being caught." Kalira felt cold spread through her chest. "You didn't know." "It doesn't matter if I knew. The result is the same." Sarah's hands twisted together. 5 wolves dead, 20 injured, and it's my fault for being his tool. "No." The word came out harder than Kalira intended. "It's Cyrus's fault for being a manipulative bastard who uses people's love as a weapon. You tried to save me. That the attempt backfired doesn't make you guilty." "It makes me responsible," Sarah insisted. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Kalira looked to Darius. "Because I'm pretty sure I've been arguing the opposite point for weeks, that being used doesn't equal complicity." Something that might have been approval flickered in the Alpha's eyes. "Touché. And for the record, I agree. Your sister made a choice based on incomplete information and Cyrus's deliberate manipulation. The guilt is his, not hers." "Then what happens to her?" Kalira asked. "That depends." Darius turned to Sarah. "You can leave. Walk away right now. Go wherever you want. I won't stop you. Or you can stay, swear genuine loyalty to this pack, and help us stop Cyrus. But if you stay, it's real. No more divided loyalties, no more hoping for the best while planning for the worst. You're either all in or you're gone." Sarah looked between them, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "If I stay, I fight? If you stay, you contribute however you can, which might mean fighting, or healing, or strategy, whatever serves the pack best." He paused. "But yes, staying means accepting that you might have to kill wolves you once called friends. It means choosing us over him, definitively." The silence stretched. Then Sarah straightened, something hardening in her expression that Kalira had never seen before. "I'm done being Cyrus's puppet. If this pack will have me, I'm yours." "Then kneel," Darius commanded. Sarah dropped to her knees and Darius placed his hand on her head. The oath of loyalty was brief but binding, spoken in the old language that predated written law. When it was done, Sarah rose with tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the pack," Morgan said, not unkindly. "Try not to burn down any more barracks." Sarah laughed, a broken, slightly hysterical sound. "I'll do my best." As guards escorted her to new quarters, Kalira caught Darius's arm. "Thank you for giving her a chance. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for you." His gaze was steady. "And because we need every able body for what's coming. If she can fight, we use her." It was pragmatic, brutal, and entirely Darius. Kalira found herself smiling despite the circumstances. "You're a good alpha." "I'm a practical one. There's a difference." But he returned the smile briefly before it faded. "Get some sleep, Kalira. Real sleep. Tomorrow we fit you with the silver pieces and run final drills. The day after..." He didn't finish. The day after, everything would burn. Kalira did sleep finally, falling into a dreamless black that felt more like unconsciousness than rest. When she woke, the compound was already in full war preparation. Wolves moved with purpose through the yard, weapons being sharpened, armor checked, strategies reviewed in tight groups. Elena found her at breakfast. "Come, time to fit your grounding pieces." The silver was beautiful in a terrible way. Delicate chains that would wrap her wrists, a thin collar for her throat, small studs for her temples. Elena explained each piece as she fitted them, adjusting for comfort and maximum contact with skin. "These will heat up when you release the energy," the healer warned. "They might even burn you, but that's preferable to the alternative, which is exploding from the inside out." "Yeah, I remember." Kalira touched the collar at her throat, feeling its weight. "How will I know when to stop? When I've released enough but not too much?" "You probably won't, which is why Darius insists on being close enough to pull you out if necessary." Elena's expression was grim. Though honestly, if you've started the release process, I'm not sure intervention will be possible. Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to maximize your chances of survival. The healer stepped back, surveying her work. The silver is your best shot. Beyond that, it's will and luck, and hoping your body is as resilient as you think it is. That afternoon, Kyalira trained with Morgan and a select group of fighters. They drilled the plan repeatedly, how they'd draw the Blood Witch close, how Kyalira would position herself, what signals she'd give if something went wrong. It was meticulous, careful work that still felt like organized chaos. You understand the witch will have protections, Morgan said during a break. Blood magic users aren't stupid. She'll have wards against physical attack. Which is why I'm not using physical attack. I'm using something she can't ward against because she doesn't know it's coming. Kyalira wiped sweat from her face. Has anyone ever used pain release as a weapon before? Not that I've found in any records. Which means you're either brilliant or insane. Morgan's expression was unreadable. Time will tell which. That night, the pack gathered for what felt like a final meal. Darius stood and addressed them, his voice carrying across the hall. Tomorrow, Ironcrest comes. They bring numbers and blood magic and the arrogance of wolves who think might makes right. They think they can take what's ours through force and fear. They're wrong. Cheers rose, fierce and defiant. We fight not just for territory or pride. We fight for the principle that every wolf has the right to choose their own path. That slavery, no matter how it's dressed up, is unacceptable. That freedom is worth defending, even when the cost is high. His eyes found Kyalira's across the room, and she felt the weight of his belief in her like a physical thing. Tomorrow, we show Cyrus and every pack watching that we don't negotiate with tyrants. We don't bow to bullies. We fight. And we win. The hall erupted, wolves howling their support. Kyalira felt the energy of it wash over her, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. These wolves were willing to die for a principle she embodied. The weight of that was crushing. After dinner, she found herself standing on the wall looking out toward Ironcrest territory. Tomorrow, an army would come from that direction. Tomorrow, everything would either end or begin. Contemplating mortality? Darius's voice came from behind her. Something like that. She didn't turn. You know there's still time to change your mind, to negotiate. Give me up, save the pack. We've had this conversation already. He moved to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Why do you keep circling back to it? Because I'm terrified. The admission came easier than expected. Not of dying. Of being the reason other wolves die. Of not being worth what you're risking. You're not the reason. Cyrus is the reason. He chose tyranny over justice. He chose to hunt you instead of letting you go. Every death tomorrow is on him, not you. Tell that to the families of the wolves who don't come home. Darius was quiet for a moment. Then, my father used to say that leadership meant carrying the weight of impossible choices. That if you weren't losing sleep over decisions, you weren't taking them seriously enough. He glanced at her. You're losing sleep over the lives you might cost. That makes you better than Cyrus already. That's a low bar. Maybe, but you'd be surprised how many fail to clear it. His hand found hers on the stone wall, covering it briefly. Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. You've already proven yourself worth fighting for. Not because of your ability, but because of who you choose to be despite everything that's been done to you. Kyalira's throat tightened. She wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment. Instead, she just squeezed his hand and whispered, Don't die tomorrow. Same to you. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. I'm not done with you yet. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and promise, and all the things they hadn't said. Then Darius released her hand and stepped back. Get some rest. Dawn comes early. But Kyalira didn't rest. She sat on the wall until the stars wheeled overhead, memorizing the feeling of peace before war, storing it away against what was coming. Dawn broke cold and clear. Kyalira was already dressed in her armor, light leather that allowed movement, the silver pieces gleaming against her skin. She'd braided her dark hair back, warrior style, and checked her weapons 3 times. The pack assembled in the yard, 300 wolves ready to face twice their number. Darius stood at the front, every inch the alpha king, and when he caught Kyalira's eye, she saw no doubt there. Only absolute conviction. The scouts returned as the sun cleared the horizon. They're coming! 200 fighters plus the Blood Witch's escort. Cyrus leads them himself. Positions, Darius commanded. The pack moved like a coordinated organism, fighters taking their places according to the battle plan. Kaelira found herself in the second line, surrounded by Morgan and 5 of the strongest enforcers. Her job was simple: stay alive until the Blood Witch revealed herself, then become bait. Simple. Not easy. The first wave hit the outer defenses like a storm. Iron Crest fighters crashed against Darius's wolves with brutal efficiency, and the sounds of combat rose to fill the morning. Kaelira forced herself to wait, to trust the plan even as every instinct screamed at her to join the fight. There, Morgan said sharply, pointing. The witch! Kaelira followed her gaze and felt ice slide down her spine. The Blood Witch was unmistakable, ancient, wrapped in tattered robes that seemed to absorb light. She walked through the battlefield like death itself, and wolves parted around her without even realizing they were doing it. Behind her, resplendent in ceremonial armor, walked Cyrus. Her former master scanned the field, and when his eyes found Kaelira, he smiled. It was a terrible expression, full of triumph and cruelty and absolute confidence. Now, Morgan said, execute the plan. Kaelira stepped forward, making herself visible. Cyrus's smile widened, and he gestured to the Blood Witch, who turned her hollow gaze toward Kaelira. The witch began to move. Kaelira's heart hammered, but she held her ground, letting the witch approach. This was the critical moment. Let her get close enough to attempt the binding, but not so close that Kaelira couldn't react. The witch raised one skeletal hand, and Kaelira felt the binding magic reach for her, cold tendrils of power meant to wrap around her will and squeeze. She let them touch her. Let the witch think it was working. Then she grabbed the witch's outstretched hand and released everything. 3 years of stored pain erupted outward in a devastating wave. The silver pieces at her wrists and throat flared white-hot, channeling the energy. And Kaelira screamed as the release tore through her. It felt like being turned inside out. Like every nerve ending was on fire. Like dying and being reborn in the same instant. The Blood Witch's eyes went wide with shock, and she tried to pull back, but it was too late. The pain Kaelira had absorbed from hundreds of victims, torture and cruelty, and endless suffering flooded into the witch in reverse, overwhelming her defenses. The witch shrieked, a sound that split the morning and collapsed. But Kaelira couldn't stop. The release had started, and now it was pulling more out of her, draining her reservoir faster than she could control. The silver was burning her skin, but it was also keeping her from fragmenting entirely, grounding the energy even as it threatened to consume her. Through the haze of agony, she saw Cyrus's face contort with rage, saw him reach for a weapon, saw Darius intercept him, the 2 alphas colliding with devastating force. Then everything went white, and Kaelira felt herself start to fall into nothing at all. The whiteness consumed everything: sound, sensation, thought itself. Kaelira existed in a liminal space between consciousness and oblivion, feeling the last dregs of stored pain drain from her like water through broken glass. Her body was somewhere distant, possibly dying, probably burning. The silver at her throat and wrists had stopped being merely hot. They'd become molten points of agony that paradoxically kept her tethered to existence. Then hands, real, solid, warm, grabbed her shoulders and pulled. Kaelira, stop! You have to stop! Darius's voice cut through the void, an anchor in chaos. She felt his presence like a lifeline and grabbed onto it instinctively, using his proximity to slam shut the floodgates of her release. The flow of energy stuttered, caught, then stopped with a violence that made her gasp. Reality crashed back in. She was on her knees in scorched earth, the ground around her blackened in a perfect circle 20 feet wide. The Blood Witch's body lay motionless 5 yards away, her face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. And standing over Kaelira, his hand still gripping her shoulders, was Darius, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his armor cracked, but alive. You're alive, she managed, her voice raw. So are you. His hands moved from her shoulders to her face, checking for damage with frantic efficiency. Can you stand? I don't know. Everything felt distant, disconnected. Her internal reservoir, that vast, dark space that had held 3 years of suffering, was empty. Completely, utterly empty. The absence was disorienting, like losing a limb she'd grown accustomed to carrying. Behind Darius, the battle still raged, but something had changed. The Iron Crest fighters were faltering, their formation breaking. Without the Blood Witch's power to bolster them, without the certainty of magical victory, They looked suddenly mortal, vulnerable. The witch is dead. Morgan's voice came from nearby. She appeared at Darius's side, her face splattered with blood. And Cyrus is down. Not dead, but incapacitated. Kaelira's head snapped up at that. Where? 20 yards east. Derek's got him pinned. Morgan's expression was grim satisfaction. You want first rights? Every part of Kaelira screamed yes. She wanted to see him broken, wanted to make him feel a fraction of what he'd inflicted. But when she tried to stand, her legs buckled and Darius caught her. Later, he said firmly. Elena first, then vengeance. I can walk? Kaelira protested, even as she sagged against him. No, you really can't. Darius lifted her like she weighed nothing, and Kaelira was too exhausted to fight it. As he carried her toward the medical tent, she caught glimpses of the battlefield, Ironcrest fighters surrendering or fleeing, Darius's wolves corralling prisoners, bodies strewn across ground that had been peaceful yesterday. The cost of her freedom, written in blood and death. Elena took one look at Kaelira and started barking orders. Within seconds, Kaelira was on a cot, the healer's hands moving over her with clinical precision. The silver pieces are fused to her skin, Elena said, her tone clipped with focus. I need to remove them before infection sets in. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts, Kaelira muttered. What's a little more? But she was wrong. When Elena began peeling away the silver collar from her throat, the pain was immediate and visceral, flesh tearing, nerves screaming. Kaelira's ability flared instinctively, trying to absorb the sensation, but her reservoir was empty. There was nowhere for the pain to go except through her. She heard herself scream distantly, as if it were happening to someone else. Hold her down, Elena commanded, and suddenly there were hands on her arms and legs, keeping her still as the healer worked. Each piece of silver that came away took skin with it, leaving raw wounds that wept clear fluid. When it was finally over, Kaelira lay trembling and gasping, her body a map of fresh burns overlaying old scars. Elena applied some kind of salve that cooled the worst of it, then wrapped her throat and wrists in clean bandages. You're lucky to be alive, the healer said flatly. The energy release should have killed you 3 times over. That you're conscious and coherent is unprecedented. How long until I can move properly? Elena snorted. You should be bedridden for a week minimum, but knowing you, you'll be up and around by tomorrow. She paused, her expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, what you did out there was extraordinary. Reckless and terrifying, but extraordinary. Kaelira managed a weak smile. That's my specialty. Darius reappeared then, and the concern in his eyes made her chest tight. How bad? She'll live. The burns will scar, but they'll heal. Elena stood, gathering her supplies. I'm needed elsewhere. Keep her here and don't let her do anything stupid. After the healer left, Darius pulled a stool close to the cot and sat heavily. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, Kaelira could see the toll the battle had taken on him. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face, blood drying on his armor, a visible limp in his left leg. You're hurt, she said. I'm fine. He waved it off. Cyrus got in a lucky strike before I took him down. Nothing critical. Is he really captured? He is, along with 43 of his fighters. The rest either died or fled. Darius leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We won, Kaelira, decisively. The word should have brought relief, triumph even. Instead, Kaelira felt hollow. How many did we lose? His jaw tightened. 18 dead, 37 wounded, seriously enough to need extended care. 18 lives. 18 wolves who died because she'd run from Ironcrest, because Darius had chosen to protect her, because Cyrus had refused to let her go. The weight of it pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Don't, Darius said softly, reading her expression. Don't take that weight. Those wolves died fighting for what they believed in. Honor that. Don't diminish it by making it about guilt. Easy for you to say. No, it's not easy at all. His hand found hers, careful of the bandages. Every alpha who leads wolves into battle carries their deaths. It's part of the responsibility. But you don't carry it alone, and you don't carry it as blame. Kaelira wanted to argue, but exhaustion was dragging at her, making coherent thought difficult. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. Sleep, Darius commanded gently. I'll be here when you wake up. She wanted to protest that he had more important things to do, that there were prisoners to interrogate and wounded to tend, and a pack to reassure. But her body had other ideas, and consciousness slipped away like water through her fingers. When she woke, it was to voices arguing nearby. Kalira kept her eyes closed, listening. Absolutely not. She's barely stable. She has a right to see him, to face him. That was Sarah's voice, tight with emotion. You can't deny her that. I can deny her whatever I think serves her recovery best. Darius, unmovable as stone. Cyrus can wait. Can he? Morgan now, pragmatic as always. Every hour we hold him without making a decision about his fate is an hour his allies can potentially mobilize a rescue. We need to deal with him soon, and Kalira should be part of that conversation. Not while she's injured. I'm awake, Kalira said, opening her eyes. And I want to see him. All three turned to look at her. Darius's expression was thunderous, but she met his gaze steadily. You're not ready, he said. I'll never be ready. She pushed herself into a sitting position, ignoring the way her body protested. But I need to do this. For myself. A long silence stretched. Then Darius sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. Fine, but I'm going with you. And if I think it's compromising your recovery, we leave immediately. Deal. They helped her stand. Her legs were shaky but functional, and she made it to the holding cells without falling over. Small victories. The cells were in the lower level of the main building, cold stone rooms designed for temporary containment. Cyrus occupied the largest, and 4 guards stood watch outside. Kalira stopped at the threshold, staring at the man who'd owned her for 3 years. Cyrus looked smaller somehow, stripped of his ceremonial armor and bound in iron chains, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unchanged. When he saw her, a slow smile spread across his face. The little absorber, he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. I must say, that display on the battlefield was impressive. Who knew you had that kind of power hiding inside? Kalira said nothing, just studied him, trying to reconcile this diminished figure with the monster who'd haunted her nightmares. Nothing to say? Cyrus continued. Come now, surely you have questions, accusations, the righteous fury of the escaped slave facing her former master. He leaned back against the wall, chains rattling. Or are you waiting for permission from your new owner to speak? She's not my property, Darius said coldly. Unlike you, I understand the concept of agency. Agency? Cyrus laughed, a harsh sound. Is that what you call it? She's traded one form of bondage for another. At least with me, she knew where she stood. I stood in a cell, Kalira finally spoke, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. I stood in pain and fear and exploitation. With Darius, I stand in choice. Choice is an illusion, the powerful grant to make the powerless feel better about their servitude. Cyrus's gaze sharpened. Tell me, Absorber, how many of his wolves died today? How many families will curse your name because their loved ones fell protecting you? That's the price of your choice. The word struck deep, finding the wound Kalira had been trying to ignore. She felt Darius tense beside her, but she held up a hand, stopping whatever he was about to say. You're right, she said, and Cyrus's eyebrows rose in surprise. Wolves died today because of me, because I ran, because Darius chose to protect me, because you refused to let me go. And I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life. She stepped closer to the bars. But here's the difference between us. I care that they died. I grieve for them. You see death as acceptable collateral in your quest for power. That's why you lost, Cyrus. Not because I'm stronger, but because you fundamentally don't understand what you're fighting against. And what's that? Love? His sneer was palpable. Sentiment? Those are weaknesses, little absorber. They make you vulnerable. They make me human, she corrected. They make life worth living. You wouldn't understand that because you stopped being anything resembling human years ago. For the first time, something flickered in Cyrus's expression. Anger, maybe, or the realization that he'd truly lost. So what now? You execute me? Make me stand trial before some council of equals? I'm curious how this story of yours ends. That's not my decision to make, Kalira said, glancing at Darius. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence filling the small space. You'll stand trial. Your crimes will be laid out before the Northern Council of Alphas, and they'll determine your fate according to pack law. Pack law. Cyrus spat the words. You mean mob justice. At least have the courage to admit you're going to kill me for defying you. I'm going to let justice kill you for being a tyrant, Darius corrected. There's a difference. As they turned to leave, Cyrus's voice followed them. She'll never be free, you know. Even with me gone, even with her power unleashed, she'll always be what I made her. A weapon, a tool, a thing to be used. Kaelira paused at the threshold, then looked back over her shoulder. You're wrong. What I am now, what I choose to be, that's mine. You had 3 years to break me, and you failed. I survived you. That's the only legacy you get. She walked out without waiting for his response, her head held high despite the pain radiating from her burns. Darius fell into step beside her, and they made it halfway to the stairs before her legs started to buckle. He caught her smoothly, one arm around her waist. Stubborn. Determined, she corrected. There's a difference. His laugh was short but genuine. Fair enough. Back in the medical tent, Elena fussed over her while Darius gave orders to Morgan about prisoner management and battlefield cleanup. The pack moved around them with the organized chaos of post-battle recovery, and through it all, Kaelira felt oddly disconnected, like she was watching it happen to someone else. Sarah appeared at some point, hovering near the entrance until Kaelira waved her over. Hey, her sister said quietly, perching on the edge of a nearby cot. How are you feeling? Like I turned myself inside out and barely survived. You? Guilty. Sarah's voice cracked. I fought against wolves I trained with, Kay. Killed 2 of them. And I keep thinking, if I'd been smarter, if I'd seen through Cyrus's manipulation sooner... Stop. Kaelira reached out, taking her sister's hand despite the ache in her own bandaged wrist. We both did what we thought was right with the information we had. Second-guessing doesn't change anything. Does that actually work for you? Not second-guessing? No, but I'm trying. Kaelira managed a tired smile. We're both trying. That's something. Sarah squeezed her hand gently, then stood. I should go. Morgan's got me on burial detail, helping prepare the fallen for the pyre ceremony tonight. After she left, Kaelira let her head fall back against the cot, staring at the tent ceiling. A pyre ceremony. 18 wolves who died fighting for her right to exist freely. How was she supposed to face their families? What words could possibly convey the weight of gratitude and grief she carried? You'll find the words, Darius said from the entrance, once again reading her thoughts with unsettling accuracy. Or you won't, and you'll stand there with them in silence. Either way, they'll know you honor their sacrifice. You're annoyingly perceptive. It's a gift. He moved closer, and Kaelira noticed he'd changed armor and had his own wounds freshly bandaged. The ceremony is at sunset. You should rest until then. I've been resting. I'm tired of resting. Then come with me. There's something you should see. He helped her stand. She was steadier now, the worst of the shock wearing off, and led her outside. The compound was transformed, wolves working to repair the damaged wall and clear debris. But that wasn't what Darius was showing her. In the training yard, a group of young wolves had gathered around someone demonstrating combat forms. It took Kaelira a moment to recognize the instructor. It was one of the wolves she'd absorbed pain from during the fire, the 15-year-old boy whose leg had been burned. He moved with confidence despite the fresh bandages, showing the younger trainees a defensive sequence. When he saw Kaelira and Darius approach, he straightened immediately. Alpha. Absorber. He nodded to each respectfully. Your leg's healing well, Kaelira observed. Because of you. His expression was serious beyond his years. I was going to lose it. The pain was so bad I couldn't think straight, but you took that away. Let me keep fighting. He hesitated, then added, My father died in the battle today. He was one of the 18, and I want you to know he knew what he was fighting for. He believed in it, in you. Kaelira's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, couldn't form words past the grief and gratitude warring in her chest, so she just nodded, hoping he understood. As they walked away, Darius said quietly, That's why we fight. Not for abstract principles, but for moments like that. For boys who keep their legs and carry their father's legacies forward. The sunset ceremony was brutal and beautiful. 18 pyres stood in a clearing beyond the compound walls, each built with care and adorned with personal effects. The pack gathered in silence, and one by one, Family members spoke about the fallen. Kaelira stood with Darius at the front, forcing herself to witness every moment, to hear every story. A mother who'd fought like a demon to protect the young wolves in the barracks. A father who'd held the line when it should have broken, buying time for reinforcements. A sister and brother who'd died side by side, refusing to retreat even when overwhelmed. When the last eulogy was spoken, Darius stepped forward. His voice carried across the clearing, strong despite the emotion underneath. These wolves died free. They died choosing to stand against tyranny, choosing to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Their sacrifice was not meaningless. It was the foundation upon which we build a future where no wolf lives in chains, where strength serves justice rather than dominating it. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. We honor them by living the values they died defending, by being worthy of their sacrifice. He lit the first pyre himself, then handed the torch to Kaelira. Her hands shook as she took it, and for a moment she couldn't move, paralyzed by the weight of what this meant. Then she thought of the boy in the training yard, of Sarah fighting free of manipulation, of her own desperate run through the wilderness. She thought of every wolf in this clearing who'd chosen courage over comfort, and she lit the second pyre. One by one, the pack lit the remaining fires until all 18 blazed against the darkening sky. The smoke rose in columns, carrying the spirits of the fallen toward whatever waited beyond. Kaelira watched through tears she didn't bother hiding, Darius's steady presence beside her an anchor in grief. When the ceremony ended and wolves began to disperse, Morgan approached them. "The Northern Council has responded to your message about Cyrus," she said without preamble. "They're sending representatives to oversee the trial. They'll arrive in 3 days." "Good," Darius nodded. "Make sure accommodations are ready, and double the guard on the prisoner. Some of his allies might try something desperate before the council arrives." As Morgan left to handle arrangements, Kaelira found herself swaying on her feet. The exhaustion was catching up again, her body demanding rest she'd been putting off. "That's it," Darius said firmly. "You're going to bed. Real bed. Proper sleep. No arguments." "I don't think I could argue if I wanted to," Kaelira admitted. He guided her back to her quarters, her room in his personal chambers, which still felt strange and safe in equal measure. Elena had left fresh bandages and more salve, along with a sleeping draught, for when the pain gets too bad to ignore. Kaelira changed into clean clothes with fumbling hands, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. When she finally collapsed into bed, the relief was immediate and overwhelming. A knock at the door interrupted her slide toward unconsciousness. "Come in," she called, expecting Elena with more medical instructions. Instead, Darius entered, carrying a tray with soup and bread. "You haven't eaten since this morning." "I'm not hungry." "I don't care. You need fuel to heal." He set the tray on the bedside table with a finality that suggested argument was pointless. Kaelira hauled herself back to sitting and accepted the bowl, taking small sips of the broth. It was good, hearty and warm, settling the nausea she'd been ignoring. Darius sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her with that intense focus he seemed to reserve for situations he considered important. "You can stop hovering," she said after a few minutes. "I'm not going to spontaneously combust. Given what happened on the battlefield, I'm not taking that for granted." But there was warmth in his voice under the concern. "You scared me today, Kaelira. When you started that release and couldn't stop, I thought I was going to watch you destroy yourself." "But you didn't. You pulled me back." She set the bowl aside, half finished. "How did you know what to do?" "I didn't. I just knew I couldn't lose you." The admission was raw, unguarded. "So I did the only thing I could think of. I gave you something to anchor to besides the pain." Kaelira's pulse quickened at the intensity in his gaze, at the implication of his words. "Darius? You don't have to say anything. Not now." He stood, moving toward the door. "Just rest. We can talk about complicated things when you're not running on fumes and desperation." He was right, but as he reached for the door handle, Kaelira heard herself say, "Stay." He turned back, surprise flickering across his face. "What?" "Stay. Just sit there. I sleep better when someone's nearby." It was more vulnerability than she'd shown in years, but she was too tired to be embarrassed by it. Something softened in his expression. "All right." He settled back into the chair and Kaelira let her eyes close, feeling safer than she had any right to. The last thing she registered before sleep claimed her was the solid presence of Darius keeping watch, a guardian against nightmares, and the lingering shadows of her past. She woke to sunlight and the sound of raised voices outside her door. Kaelira blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented, then remembered the battle, the trial, the pyre ceremony. She pushed herself upright, testing her body's responses. Everything hurt, but it was manageable pain, the kind that meant healing, not breaking. The voices outside grew louder, and she recognized Morgan's sharp tone cutting through someone else's protest. Curious and concerned in equal measure, Kaelira wrapped a robe around herself and opened the door. Morgan stood in the hallway, blocking the path of a wolf Kaelira didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying himself with the arrogance of someone used to authority. "Don't care what your title is," Morgan was saying, her stance aggressive. "You're not barging into the Alpha King's quarters making demands." "What's going on?" Kaelira interrupted. Both wolves turned. The stranger's eyes widened when he saw her, his gaze raking over her bandaged wrists and throat with undisguised curiosity. "You're the absorber," he said, not quite making it a question. "I'm Kaelira Voss," she corrected, already disliking him. "And you are?" "Aldrich Thorne, Alpha of the Stoneclaw Pack. I'm here as part of the Northern Council to oversee Cyrus's trial." His tone suggested he expected recognition and deference. "Then you should be speaking with Alpha King Darius, not disrupting his household." Morgan's voice could have cut glass. Aldrich's jaw tightened. "I was attempting to speak with him, but apparently he's not receiving visitors. I was told he's with the prisoner." "He's conducting preliminary interrogations," Kaelira said, reading between the lines of Morgan's protective stance. "I'm sure he'll meet with the council representatives once he's finished. And how long might that take?" Aldrich's impatience was barely masked. "We have limited time, and I'd like to understand the situation before the trial begins." "Then I suggest waiting like everyone else." Kaelira kept her tone polite but firm. "This pack just fought a battle yesterday. We're still burying our dead. Your impatience isn't our priority." Aldrich's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Darius's voice carried up the hallway. "Aldrich, I see you've made yourself at home." The Stoneclaw Alpha turned, and Kaelira watched something like calculation flash across his face. "Darius, my condolences on your losses. I understand yesterday was costly." "Necessary," Darius corrected, moving to stand beside Kaelira. His hand found the small of her back, a casual touch that somehow felt significant. "And victorious. Cyrus is contained, his blood witch dead, and his power broken. I'd call that success. At the cost of 18 wolves and significant territory damage," Aldrich countered. "Some might question whether the cost outweighed the gain." "Then those some are welcome to question me directly at the council session." Darius's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "For now, Morgan will show you to your accommodations. The trial begins tomorrow at dawn." As Morgan led Aldrich away, the Stoneclaw Alpha shooting one last measuring look at Kaelira, Darius turned to her with resignation. "He's going to be a problem," Kaelira said. "Undoubtedly. Aldrich's been pushing for a northern alliance that would give him more influence over the smaller packs. He sees Cyrus's fall as an opportunity to argue that strong central control is necessary to prevent chaos." Darius guided her back into her room, away from potentially listening ears. "He'll use the trial to advance his political agenda. Can he actually challenge your authority? Not directly. But he can make things difficult. Sow doubt, question decisions, frame the battle as reckless rather than principled." Darius ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion showing through his controlled exterior. "Politics is war by other means." Kaelira perched on the edge of her bed, studying him. "You barely slept, did you?" "I slept enough." The deflection was automatic. Liar. But she said it without heat. "Come here." He raised an eyebrow but complied, sitting beside her. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension carried in his shoulders. "Give me your hand," she said. Darius offered his left hand, curious but cautious. Kaelira took it between both of hers, feeling for the ache in his joints and muscles. Her ability flickered to life, tentative, testing its own limits after yesterday's massive release. The pain was there, accumulated from combat and stress, and she drew it out carefully, absorbing it in small measured amounts. "You don't have to," Darius started. "I know. I want to." She kept her focus on the absorption, feeling her reservoir begin to fill again. It was different now, lighter somehow, not weighted with years of forced servitude. This was a choice, freely made. Besides, I need to test my limits. Figure out what yesterday's release actually changed. As she worked, she felt him relax incrementally, the pain leaving his body, allowing him to finally let go of some control. When she finished, he looked at her with something between wonder and concern. "You're different," he said quietly. "I feel different." Kaylira flexed her fingers, examining the sensation. Before, absorbing pain felt like drowning slowly. Now it's more like, swimming. I'm still carrying weight, but I can choose how much and when to release it. That's significant. Yeah. She met his eyes. I think destroying the blood witch while simultaneously draining my entire reservoir fundamentally changed how my ability works. I'm not just a container anymore. I'm a conduit. Understanding dawned in Darius's expression, which means you're even more valuable and more dangerous than before. Which means Aldrich and wolves like him are going to see me as a tool to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. Kael'Rva stated it matter-of-factly, already running through implications. The trial isn't just about Cyrus, it's about establishing whether I'm a person with rights or a resource to be managed. "You're a person," Darius said fiercely, "and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." The vehemence in his voice made her chest tight. "That's kind of the problem. You're so clearly invested in protecting me that wolves like Aldrich can use it against you. Claim you're compromised, that your judgment is clouded. Let them claim what they want. My judgment is sound." "Is it?" The question came out softer than intended. "Darius, you risked your pack for me. Wolves died because you chose protection over pragmatism. How do you know that was the right call?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. Because some decisions aren't about right or wrong in a tactical sense. They're about what kind of leader, what kind of person you choose to be. And I choose to be someone who doesn't bow to tyrants, who doesn't calculate sentience in terms of convenience. His hand came up, cupping her jaw gently. "I choose you, Kael'Rva, not because you're useful, not because your ability serves my pack, but because you deserve to exist freely. That's reason enough." Kael'Rva's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words, at the weight of what he was offering. "That's terrifying." "Good. It should be. Anything worth having usually is." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and the tenderness of it made something in her chest crack open. "But you're worth the terror." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and promise, and all the things neither of them seemed brave enough to say outright. Then reality intruded in the form of a sharp knock at the door, and they both pulled back instinctively. Morgan entered without waiting for permission, her expression urgent. "We have a situation. One of Cyrus's captured fighters is asking to speak with Kael'Rva, says he has information about loyalists still embedded in our pack." The implications hit like ice water. "How many others did Cyrus plant?" "That's what we need to find out." Morgan looked between them, clearly reading the interrupted moment, but professional enough not to comment. "He'll only speak to the absorber. Says it's the condition for cooperation." Kael'Rva stood, already reaching for proper clothes. "Then I'll speak with him." "Absolutely not without proper security," Darius countered, also rising. "This could be a setup. One last attempt to..." "To what? I destroyed a blood witch yesterday and survived. What's one more of Cyrus's broken toys going to do?" But even as she said it, Kael'Rva knew he had a point. Yesterday's victory didn't make her invincible, just exhausted and healing. They compromised. Kael'Rva would conduct the interview, but with Morgan and 2 guards present, in a secured room with Darius observing from outside. The captured fighter, a young wolf named Wren, who looked barely older than 20, was brought up from the cells and secured to a chair. He looked rough, sporting a black eye and split lip from the battle, but his gaze was steady when it found Kael'Rva. "You're really free," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "When Marcus and Garrett came back and said you'd killed the Blood Witch, I thought they were lying." "I'm free," Kael'Rva confirmed, taking the seat across from him. "And you want to be?" "I want to not die when Cyrus's remaining loyalists decide I'm expendable for talking." Wren glanced at Morgan. "I was low-ranking in Ironcrest. Cyrus used me for manual labor, nothing important, but I saw things, heard things." "Like what?" He swallowed hard. Like plans for after the Blood Witch binding succeeded. Cyrus wasn't just going to take you back. He was going to use you to systematically break the Alpha King's pack from the inside, absorb pain and information from key wolves, turn them into puppets, replace the leadership structure entirely. A chill ran down Kalira's spine. And these loyalists you mentioned? 3 that I know of for certain. Maybe more. Ren leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. They're supposed to activate if Cyrus is captured or killed. Sabotage from within, create chaos during any leadership transition. Morgan had gone very still. Names. I don't know all of them, but one is a kitchen worker named Jarrus. He's been here almost a year, transferred from a pack Cyrus had alliance with. Ren's jaw clenched. The other 2 are more embedded. One's an enforcer, the other works in supplies. I never got their names, just overheard that they existed. It made horrible sense. Cyrus had always played the long game, always had backup plans and contingencies. Of course, he'd plant agents in Darius's pack, seeds waiting to sprout into betrayal. Why should we believe you? Morgan demanded. Because I'm dead either way, Ren said simply. If Cyrus's loyalists think I talked, they'll kill me to keep me quiet. If your Alpha executes me with the other prisoners, I'm still dead. My only chance is to offer you something valuable enough that you'll protect me. So here it is. There's a supply cache hidden in the eastern forest, 2 miles past your patrol range. Weapons, gold, false identification papers. Cyrus's escape plan if everything went wrong. He met Kalira's eyes. That's verifiable. Send scouts. If I'm lying, you know I'm worthless. If I'm telling the truth, maybe I get to live as something other than Cyrus's property. Kalira studied him, reading the desperation and fear and faint hope in his expression. Her ability stirred, and she realized she could sense his pain, the accumulated suffering of living under Cyrus's rule, the fresh wounds from yesterday's battle, the terror of uncertain fate. He was telling the truth, or at least what he believed to be truth. Morgan, verify the cache, she said. If it's real, we protect Ren and use his information to root out the loyalists. The beta nodded and left to organize a scouting party. After she was gone, Kalira stood and moved closer to Ren. If you're lying, she said quietly, if this is some elaborate setup, you should know. I can make you feel every injury Cyrus ever inflicted on his victims, all at once, in your head, until you break. It was a bluff, mostly. She didn't know if she could actually do that with her modified ability, but Ren didn't need to know that. His face went white. I'm not lying. I swear on whatever's sacred. I just want out. Then help us get out completely. Not just you, but everyone Cyrus still has claws in. She paused. Do that, and maybe you get to build an actual life instead of just surviving. Hope flickered in his eyes, raw and painful and desperately genuine. I'll tell you everything I know. And he did. For the next 2 hours, Ren provided details about Cyrus's network, his methods, the other captive wolves who might be willing to defect if given the chance. By the time they finished, Kalira had a headache from processing information and Ren was hoarse from talking. The scouts returned that afternoon confirming the supply cache exactly where Ren had indicated. The evidence was damning, not just weapons and gold, but documents detailing Cyrus's long-term plans for Northern Territory's expansion. Darius called an emergency council meeting, and this time Kalira attended officially. Aldrich was there, along with representatives from 2 other packs, and they listened with varying expressions of shock and anger as Morgan presented the findings. This is beyond simple slavery, one of the representatives said, a grizzled female alpha named Kara. This is systematic conspiracy to undermine pack sovereignty. Which is why Cyrus's trial must result in permanent removal, Aldrich interjected. Execution or binding to prevent any future threat. Agreed, Darius said, surprising everyone. But we need to ensure we've rooted out all his loyalists first. I won't have sleeper agents undermining the trial's legitimacy. They spent hours developing a strategy to identify and neutralize the embedded loyalists. It was delicate work. Move too quickly and the agents would scatter or go deeper underground. Move too slowly and they'd have time to cause critical damage. Kalira contributed what she could, her unique perspective on Cyrus's methods proving valuable. But she was exhausted by the time the meeting concluded, her body reminding her that she'd nearly destroyed herself less than 48 hours ago. As the representatives dispersed, Aldrich approached her. A word, Miss Voss? Something in his tone immediately put her on guard. What about? Your ability, your status within this pack. He gestured toward a quiet corner away from other wolves. You understand that your presence here creates complications beyond the immediate situation with Cyrus. Complications? Kalira kept her voice neutral. You're a power that needs management. Protection, certainly, but also oversight. Left unchecked, an ability like yours could be dangerous. Aldrich's expression was carefully sympathetic. I'm sure you understand the necessity of structure, of appropriate guardianship to ensure. To ensure I don't become a threat? Kalira finished, ice creeping into her tone. That's what you mean, isn't it? That I need to be controlled for everyone's safety. I mean that power requires responsibility. And given your history of instability, my history of being enslaved, she corrected sharply. Don't dress it up. You're saying I can't be trusted with my own autonomy because Cyrus broke me. That's what this conversation is really about. Aldrich's mask slipped, showing calculation underneath. I'm saying the Northern Territories would benefit from clear protocols for wolves with extraordinary abilities. That leaving such decisions solely to individual alphas creates unnecessary risk. You want to institutionalize control, turn me into a resource that answers to a council instead of a person who makes her own choices. Kalira stepped closer, her presence expanding despite her physical exhaustion. Here's what I understand, Alpha Aldrich. You're terrified. Not of me specifically, but of what I represent. The idea that power doesn't automatically grant authority over others. That strength can exist without dominance. So you're trying to preemptively cage me before I become a problem you can't control. That's not... We're done here. She turned away, then paused. And for your information, any attempt to impose guardianship over me will result in a very direct demonstration of exactly how dangerous an unchecked pain absorber can be. Tell your counsel that. She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding and hands shaking with suppressed rage. The audacity of it. She'd barely survived Cyrus's exploitation, and already another alpha was scheming to bind her in different chains. Darius found her on the wall again, her refuge spot. He approached quietly, not speaking until he stood beside her. I heard about your conversation with Aldrich, he said finally. Heard or were informed? Morgan may have mentioned it, along with the fact that you essentially threatened a visiting alpha. There was no censure in his tone, just wry amusement. I'm impressed and concerned, and also wondering if I need to add threatening council members to your list of skills. Despite herself, Kalira laughed, short and sharp. He was talking about institutionalized control, about making me answer to a council of alphas for my own safety, like I'm a weapon that needs proper storage instead of a person who deserves basic autonomy. I know, and it's not going to happen. Darius's voice carried absolute conviction. You're not going to be anyone's weapon, not Cyrus's, not the council's, not even mine. Aldrich's going to push this. He sees an opportunity to expand his influence, create precedents that give him authority over wolves like me. Let him push. He'll find I push back harder. Darius turned to face her fully. Kalira, you just helped us uncover a conspiracy that could have destroyed this pack from within. You killed a blood witch, survived a catastrophic energy release, and you're still standing here arguing with visiting alphas. You're not a weapon, you're a force of nature, and anyone who tries to cage that is going to learn a painful lesson. The fierce pride in his voice made her chest tight. You make it sound like I'm something extraordinary. You are. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. And tomorrow, when Cyrus's trial begins, the whole Northern Territories are going to see exactly how extraordinary. Let Aldrich scheme. Let the council debate. You've already proven you're more than any of them can control. Kalira leaned into his touch, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability before the trials ahead. What if they don't see it that way? What if they decide I'm too dangerous to leave free? Then they'll have to go through me, and I don't lose easily. The promise in his words was absolute, and for the first time since waking from her collapse, Kalira felt something like hope settle in her chest. Tomorrow would bring judgment and politics and the culmination of everything she'd fought for. But tonight, standing on the wall with Darius beside her, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, freedom was actually possible. The trial would determine her fate, but for the first time, that fate felt like something she had a hand in shaping rather than something imposed upon her. And that made all the difference. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that felt like a judgment in itself. Kaelira stood before the mirror in her quarters, studying her reflection with a detachment born of exhaustion and anticipation. The bandages at her throat and wrists were fresh, but the burns underneath were healing faster than Elena had predicted. Her ability's transformation was affecting more than just pain absorption. Her entire physiology seemed to be adapting, strengthening. She'd chosen her clothing carefully, simple black pants and a fitted tunic that covered most of her scars but didn't hide the bandages. Let them see what she'd survived. Let them understand the cost of freedom. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah entered, carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. "Darius sent this," her sister said, unfolding the cloth to reveal a vest made of supple leather reinforced with thin plates of silver. It's ceremonial armor, usually worn by pack members during formal trials when they might be called to testify or serve as witnesses. Kaelira ran her fingers over the silver inlay, feeling its cool smoothness. "He's making a statement. He's saying your pack, that you have standing in this trial beyond just being the victim." Sarah helped her into the vest, adjusting the fit. "Aldrich's going to hate it." "Good." Kaelira flexed her shoulders, testing the weight. It was substantial but not restrictive, protection that didn't limit movement. "How are you holding up?" Sarah's hand stilled on the buckles. "Terrified. Guilty. Angry at myself for being terrified and guilty." She finished fastening the vest and stepped back. "But I'm standing here instead of running, so that's something." "It's everything." Kaelira turned to face her sister. "Thank you. For choosing this. For choosing me. Even when it meant turning against everything you knew." Sarah's eyes glistened. "You're my sister. That was never a choice. It was just what you do." They embraced briefly, and Kaelira felt some of Sarah's fear and guilt flow into her through her ability. She absorbed it automatically, giving her sister a moment of relief before the trial began. It was a small thing, but Sarah's shoulders relaxed incrementally. "Come on," Kaelira said, releasing her. "Let's go face down some alphas." The great hall had been transformed into a trial chamber. Long tables flanked both sides, with the Northern Council representatives seated at one and Darius's key advisors at the other. At the far end, a raised platform held 3 ornate chairs, the judgment seats. And in the center of the room, surrounded by guards, stood Cyrus. He looked diminished in the morning light, stripped of the ceremonial armor and power that had once made him terrifying. But his eyes were sharp as ever, tracking Kaelira as she entered with calculated intensity. The hall filled quickly, pack members, witnesses, representatives from neighboring territories. Everyone wanted to see justice served, or at least to witness the spectacle of a fallen alpha facing judgment. Darius stood at the front, wearing formal armor that marked him as both Alpha King and presiding authority. When his gaze found Kaelira, something passed between them: recognition, support, and a promise that whatever happened, they'd face it together. Aldrich sat among the council representatives, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture radiating disapproval. Beside him, Kara and the third representative, a lean male alpha named Torsten, watched everything with assessing eyes. "This tribunal is convened," Darius's voice rang out, commanding immediate silence. "We are here to judge the crimes of Cyrus Thorne, formerly Alpha of the Iron Crest Pack. The charges are slavery, torture, conspiracy to undermine Pack sovereignty, and the employment of forbidden blood magic." He paused, letting the weight of the accusations settle. "How does the accused plead?" Cyrus smiled, that terrible cold expression that Kaelira remembered from countless nightmares. "Not guilty, on all counts." A murmur ran through the assembled wolves. Darius's expression didn't change, but Kaelira saw his jaw tighten fractionally. "Then we proceed to evidence and testimony." Darius gestured to Morgan, who stood and approached with a thick folder of documents. "The council will hear first from those who suffered under the accused's authority." What followed was brutal. One by one, wolves who'd escaped Ironcrest or been rescued during the battle testified to Cyrus's methods. They spoke of cells and chains, of pain used as punishment and control, of abilities exploited until the wielders broke. A young healer described having her gift forcibly drained to save Cyrus's favored fighters over and over until she could barely function. An enforcer testified about being forced to torture prisoners or face torture himself. Through it all, Cyrus sat impassive, as if the testimony was about someone else entirely. When the survivors finished, Aldrich spoke up. These testimonies establish mistreatment, certainly, but slavery is a strong charge. The accused maintains these wolves were pack members who broke rules and faced appropriate discipline. Discipline? Kara repeated, her tone skeptical. That's what you call forcing a healer to drain herself to exhaustion repeatedly? I call it a leader making hard choices to protect his pack's strongest assets. Aldrich's gaze flicked to Kaelira. Resources must be managed. That's not slavery. It's pragmatic leadership. Kaelira felt cold rage settle in her chest. He was defending Cyrus's methods, laying groundwork for his own agenda. If he could normalize exploitation as resource management, he could justify similar control over her and wolves like her. Then let's discuss resource management, Darius said, his voice carrying an edge. Morgan, present the supply cache findings. The evidence was damning. Documents detailing Cyrus's plans to systematically infiltrate and undermine neighboring packs, to acquire wolves with valuable abilities through coercion and force, to build a power base that would let him dominate the northern territories. It wasn't just mistreatment of his own pack, it was conspiracy on a massive scale. Even Aldrich looked uncomfortable as the scope of Cyrus's ambitions became clear. These are fabrications, Cyrus said, speaking for the first time since his plea. Convenient evidence that appeared after my capture. How do we know the Alpha King didn't manufacture this to justify his aggressive actions? Because I can corroborate it. Ren's voice came from the back of the hall. The young wolf stepped forward, flanked by guards, and every eye turned to him. I was part of Ironcrest. I saw Master Cyrus plan these operations. I helped hide some of the supply caches. Everything in those documents is real. Cyrus's expression finally cracked, fury bleeding through his controlled mask. Traitor, you're testifying against your own alpha. You stopped being my alpha the moment you treated me like property instead of pack, Ren shot back, his voice stronger than Kaelira had heard before. I'm not the traitor here. You are. You betrayed every wolf who trusted you. The hall erupted in murmurs. Darius let them continue for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. The council will hear testimony from the primary victim. Kaelira Voss, come forward. Kaelira's pulse kicked up, but she moved to the center of the room with steady steps. She was hyper-aware of everyone watching, judging, assessing, deciding whether she was victim or weapon or something in between. Darius's gaze met hers, grounding her. Tell us what you experienced under Cyrus's authority. But she took a breath, then began. Not with the dramatic moments, but with the small degradations that had eroded her sense of self over 3 years. The cell that was too small to stand in properly. The calculated starvation that kept her weak but functional. The way Cyrus had used her ability to torture his enemies, forcing her to absorb their pain so he could watch them suffer without visible marks. The experiments to test her limits, pushing her to the edge of death repeatedly to see where she'd break. He called it training, Kaelira said, her voice steady despite the memories clawing at her throat. Said he was helping me reach my potential, but it was never about potential. It was about control, about breaking me down until I believed I existed only to serve his purposes. And yet you escaped, Aldrich interjected. If his control was so absolute, how did you manage to flee? Because he made a mistake. He assumed that breaking someone meant they'd stay broken. Kaelira turned to face the council representatives directly. He thought 3 years of torture would make me compliant. Instead, it taught me exactly how much I could survive. And once I knew that, once I understood my own capacity for endurance, I started planning. Planning what? Kara asked, leaning forward. To become something other than his tool. To remember that I was a person before I was an ability. Kaelira's hands clenched at her sides. I absorbed pain from his victims, and each time I did, I stored their stories, their hope, their refusal to give up even when everything was taken from them. I became a living record of his crimes, and when the opportunity came, I took it and ran. Killing your handler in the process, Cyrus noted. Interesting that you frame yourself as a victim while admitting to murder. Self-defense, Kaelira corrected. He was going to drag me back to your cells after I'd been caught trying to steal food. I chose to fight instead of starve. You chose violence, just as you chose violence against the Blood Witch. Cyrus's smile returned, calculating. Tell me, Absorber, how many people have you killed with that ability of yours? How many died when you released all that stored pain on the battlefield? The question landed like a punch. Kaelira saw what he was doing, trying to reframe her as dangerous, uncontrolled, a threat that needed to be contained. It was the same argument Aldrich was building toward. "One," she said clearly. "The Blood Witch died because she tried to enslave me and I fought back. No one else died from my release. The energy was directed and controlled. Difficult, painful, nearly fatal for me, but controlled." "Nearly fatal," Aldrich repeated. "And what happens next time? When you absorb too much and can't control the release, who dies then?" "That's not," Kaelira started. "It's a legitimate question," Aldrich pressed. "You're asking this council to declare you a free wolf with full autonomy, but your ability makes you a walking catastrophe waiting to happen. Don't we have an obligation to ensure proper oversight for everyone's safety, including yours?" The trap was closing. Kaelira could see it in Aldrich's expression, in the way some of the assembled wolves were nodding along. They were afraid of her power, and fear was the foundation of control. "If I may," a new voice spoke up. Elena stepped forward from the observers, her healer's robes marking her as neutral authority. "I've studied Kaelira's ability extensively over the past weeks. What happened on the battlefield was an unprecedented event, a complete reservoir drain under extreme duress. But her ability has fundamentally changed since then. She's no longer just a passive absorber. She's developed active control over energy flow, both inward and outward." "Meaning what, exactly?" Torsten asked. "Meaning she can regulate her absorption, choose when and how much to release, and direct the energy with precision." Elena pulled out her medical notes. "I've run tests. She can absorb a specific injury from a specific location on a body without taking anything else. She can release stored pain in measured amounts instead of catastrophic bursts. The battlefield event was transformative. It evolved her ability from passive tool to active skill." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "That makes her even more dangerous. A weapon with precision is still a weapon." "A weapon would require intent to harm," Darius interjected. "Kaelira's intent has consistently been survival and protection. That's not a weapon. That's a defender." "Semantics," Aldrich waved it off. "The point stands. An ability this powerful requires oversight. I'm proposing that the Council establish protocols for wolves with catastrophic potential, regular check-ins, mandatory training, restrictions on— "No!" Kaelira's voice cut through his speech like a blade. "Absolutely not." The hall went silent. Aldrich stared at her, surprise giving way to annoyance. "Excuse me." "I said no." Kaelira stepped forward, positioning herself between the council representatives and Cyrus. "You want to establish protocols, create oversight structures, turn me and wolves like me into managed resources? That's just Cyrus's system with better PR." "That's not—" Aldrich started. "It is exactly that." Kaelira's voice rose, projecting to every corner of the hall. "You're scared of power you can't control, so you're trying to preemptively cage it. But here's what you're missing. Power doesn't need your permission to exist. It just is. And the only question is whether we use it to dominate or to protect." She turned to address the entire assembly now, not just the council. "Cyrus used his power to dominate, to exploit, to enslave, to break wolves who couldn't fight back. That's the system Aldrich wants to formalize. The idea that strength gives you authority over others, that the powerful get to decide what's safe and what's dangerous based on their own comfort." "You're twisting my words," Aldrich protested. "I'm clarifying your intent." Kaelira moved closer to the council table. "You want protocols that give you control over me. That let you dictate when and how I use my ability, where I can go, what I can do. You want to make me safe by making me powerless. But I've been powerless, and I've been powerful, and I can tell you which one actually kept me alive." Kara was watching her with sharp interest. "And what do you propose instead? That wolves with dangerous abilities operate without any accountability?" "I propose that we start treating sentient beings like sentient beings instead of resources to be managed." Kaelira gestured to the assembled pack members. "Every wolf in this room has the capacity to be dangerous. Every enforcer, every hunter, every alpha sitting on that council could kill with their bare hands if they chose to. But we don't establish mandatory oversight protocols for them because we recognize they have agency. They make choices. Why is my ability different?" "Because the scale of damage you could cause," Aldrich began, "is the same scale Cyrus actually caused through systematic torture and exploitation," Kaelira finished. "The difference is intent and choice. Judge me on my actions, not your fear of what I might theoretically do."
Silence fell across the hall. Then Torsten spoke, his voice thoughtful. She makes a valid point. We're conflating capacity with intent. By that logic, we should restrict every Alpha's authority because they could theoretically abuse their power. Some would argue we should, Aldrich muttered, but he looked uncomfortable now, his argument crumbling under scrutiny. Darius stood, drawing all eyes to him. The question before this council isn't whether Kaelira's ability makes her dangerous. It's whether Cyrus's treatment of her, and wolves like her, constitutes criminal behavior worthy of permanent sanction. And I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. Agreed, Kara said. Torsten nodded as well. Aldrich looked between them, realizing he'd lost the majority. Fine, but I want it on record that I believe we're setting a dangerous precedent by allowing unregulated power. Noted and dismissed, Darius cut him off. Cyrus Thorne, you stand convicted of slavery, torture, and conspiracy. The sentence is death by combat. You'll face judgment by someone you've directly harmed in a fair fight witnessed by all present. Do you accept these terms? Cyrus's expression had gone cold and flat. And if I refuse? Then you die right now, executed as a criminal. At least combat gives you a chance. Darius's tone made it clear which option he preferred. Choose. Combat, Cyrus said after a long pause. Then his gaze found Kaelira, and that terrible smile returned. And I choose my opponent, the absorber herself. Let's see if she's as powerful as she claims when facing me directly. Kaelira's blood ran cold. She'd expected Darius to be his opponent, or one of the senior enforcers. Not her. Cyrus was trying to corner her into a situation where she either looked weak by refusing or risked death by accepting. I accept, she heard herself say before Darius could object. The hall erupted. Darius turned to her, fury and fear warring in his expression, but she met his gaze steadily. This was right. This was necessary. Cyrus had controlled her for 3 years. Letting someone else deliver justice wouldn't close that wound. She needed to do this herself. Kaelira, Darius started. It's my right, she said quietly, for his ears only. You know it is. His jaw worked, and she could see him fighting between alpha instinct to protect and respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Standard combat rules. First blood, submission, or death. Death, Cyrus said immediately. We end this permanently. Death, Kaelira agreed, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. They cleared the center of the hall, creating a ring 30 feet across. Weapons were offered. Kaelira chose a pair of short blades, familiar from her training. Cyrus selected a longer sword, testing its weight with practiced ease. Elena appeared at Kaelira's side as they prepared. Your burns aren't fully healed. Extended combat will reopen them, and you don't have the reserves to absorb that pain while fighting. I know. Kaelira flexed her hands around the blade grips. But I can't let him win, not after everything. Then don't fight him fair, he won't. Elena pressed something into her palm, a small vial filled with dark liquid. Painkiller. Fast acting. Lasts about 10 minutes. Use it when you need it, but be careful. It'll dull your reaction time slightly. Kaelira tucked the vial into her belt, grateful for the backup plan. Around the ring, wolves had gathered to watch. Her pack, Cyrus's captured fighters, the council representatives, everyone drawn to witness this final confrontation. Darius caught her arm as she moved toward the ring. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. She covered his hand with hers briefly. I need to prove I can. Not to them. To myself. Understanding flickered in his eyes, followed by resignation. Then fight smart. He's got more combat experience, more raw strength. But you're faster, and you know his patterns better than anyone. Because I spent 3 years watching him hurt people. Kaelira managed a tight smile. Time to use that education. She stepped into the ring. Cyrus stood on the opposite side, rolling his shoulders, supremely confident. And why wouldn't he be? He'd trained for decades, had built his reputation on personal combat prowess. She was a former prisoner who'd only been training seriously for a few weeks, but she'd survived him once already. She could do it again. Darius raised his hand. Begin. Cyrus moved first, closing the distance with frightening speed. His sword came down in a powerful arc meant to overwhelm her guard. Kaelira dodged instead of blocking, letting his momentum carry him past,
and scored a shallow cut across his ribs as he passed. First blood. Technically, she could claim victory. Cyrus touched his side, looked at the blood on his fingers, and laughed. Good. I was hoping you'd make this interesting. The fight intensified. Cyrus pressed forward with brutal efficiency, each strike calculated to force her into worse positions. Kaelira gave ground, using her speed to stay just out of range, waiting for openings. Her ability flared as she read his body. Old injuries from previous battles, the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, the way he favored his right leg. All weaknesses she could exploit if she could just get close enough. But Cyrus was too experienced to give her easy opportunities. He controlled the center of the ring, forcing her to move constantly, wearing her down through attrition. And he was right. Her burns were reopening, fresh pain radiating from her throat and wrists with every movement. A wild swing came closer than intended, and Kaelira's dodge was too slow. The sword tip caught her arm, tearing through fabric and skin. Blood welled immediately, and she felt her ability try to absorb the pain automatically before she could stop it. Her reservoir filled fractionally. Not much, but enough to remind her of the weapon she carried inside. Cyrus saw her hesitation and pressed the attack. There it is. The moment you remember what you are. A container for suffering. That's all you'll ever be, Absorber. A tool that pretends to be a person. The words were meant to break her concentration, to make her doubt. Instead, they crystallized her resolve. You're wrong, she said, dodging another strike. I'm not a container. I'm a conduit. She stopped retreating and lunged forward, abandoning defense entirely. Her blades moved in a flurry of strikes. Some blocked, some deflected, but one got through. The tip of her knife scored across Cyrus's sword arm, drawing blood. More importantly, she made contact. Her ability surged, and she absorbed 3 years of pain in reverse, taking not from him, but pushing into him. Every injury she'd witnessed him inflict on others, every moment of suffering she'd absorbed from his victims, she channeled directly into his nervous system. Cyrus screamed. It was a raw, agonized sound that echoed off the walls. He stumbled back, his sword clattering to the ground as he clutched his head. The pain wasn't real in a physical sense. She wasn't actually injuring him, but his mind couldn't tell the difference, overwhelmed by phantom suffering too vast to process. Kaelira pressed forward, maintaining contact, pouring more stored pain into him. She saw his legs buckle, saw him fall to his knees. This was justice. Not clean or pretty, but absolutely earned. Every moment of agony she was forcing him to experience, he'd inflicted on someone else first. Stop, he gasped. Please, stop. Did you stop when they begged? Kaelira's voice was cold. Did you show mercy when your victims pleaded? I'll release all claims, anything you want. I don't want your bargains. I want you to understand. She crouched down, forcing him to meet her eyes. This is what you did. To me, to hundreds of others. You made us live with this kind of pain every single day, and you felt nothing. Cyrus's face had gone gray, his breathing shallow. She could kill him like this, overload his system until his heart stopped from the sheer overwhelming input. It would be easy, justified even. But as she looked at him, broken, defeated, stripped of all power and dignity, Kaelira realized something fundamental. Killing him wouldn't free her. It would just bind her to him in a different way, make her into the weapon he'd always tried to create. She released the connection and stood, stepping back. Cyrus collapsed fully, gasping and trembling. The hall was silent, every wolf watching with expressions ranging from horror to grim satisfaction. I yield, Cyrus whispered. I submit. Kaelira looked to Darius. Your judgment, Alpha King. Darius stepped into the ring, his expression unreadable. Cyrus Thorn, you've been defeated in combat by the wolf you enslaved. By pack law, your life belongs to her. But the crimes you committed go beyond one victim. You've brutalized entire packs, undermined territorial sovereignty, employed forbidden magic. He paused. The sentence remains death, but it will be clean and quick, more mercy than you ever showed. He gestured to 2 guards who moved forward to haul Cyrus to his feet. The former Alpha looked at Kaelira one last time, and there was something almost like respect in his eyes. You could have killed me, he said. Why didn't you? Because I'm not you, Kaelira replied simply. And I never will be. They took him away. The execution would happen privately, witnessed by the council representatives, but not made into spectacle. It was over. 3 years of suffering, weeks of battle and preparation, and it ended with her standing in a ring surrounded by witnesses, finally, definitively free. Kaelira's legs gave out. Darius caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady around her. "I've got you." "I know," she managed, and then the adrenaline crash hit and everything went distant and fuzzy. She woke in her quarters, again, with Elena hovering and muttering about stubborn wolves who pushed themselves past all reasonable limits. Darius sat in his usual chair, and when Kaelira's eyes opened, relief flooded his expression. "How long?" she asked. 3 hours. You collapsed from exhaustion, blood loss, and what Elena calls catastrophic ability overuse. His tone was somewhere between annoyed and impressed. Apparently, channeling stored pain into another person is even more draining than releasing it into the environment. Good to know. Kaelira pushed herself up slowly, taking inventory. Her burns were freshly bandaged, her arms stitched where Cyrus's sword had caught her. Everything hurt, but it was manageable hurt. Healing hurt. Is he dead? Clean execution, confirmed by all 3 council representatives. Darius leaned forward. It's done, Kaelira. Cyrus is gone, his pack is dissolved, and you're free. Officially, legally, completely free. The words should have brought relief, joy, triumph. Instead, Kaelira felt hollow, like she'd been carrying weight for so long that its absence left her unbalanced. What happens now? She asked quietly. That depends on what you want. Darius's expression was carefully neutral. The council has declared you a free wolf with full rights and autonomy. Aldrich tried to push for oversight protocols, but he was outvoted. You can go anywhere, do anything. The Northern Territories are open to you. That sounds suspiciously like you're telling me to leave. No. The word came out fierce. That's me telling you that you have choices, real ones, not illusions. And whatever you choose, I'll support it. Kaelira studied him, this alpha who'd risked everything for her, who'd fought beside her, who'd somehow become essential to her sense of safety and possibility. What if I choose to stay? Something shifted in his expression, hope breaking through careful control. Then you stay, as pack, as... He hesitated, and Kaelira saw vulnerability flash across his face. As whatever you want to be. To me. To this pack. The choice is yours. That's a lot of choice for someone who spent 3 years without any. Then take your time. Figure out what you actually want instead of just reacting to what's been forced on you. He stood, moving toward the door. No pressure. No expectations. Just possibility. After he left, Kaelira lay in the comfortable bed in the safe room in the protected compound and let herself feel the full weight of freedom. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was hers. The next week passed in a strange blur. Cyrus's remaining loyalists were identified and dealt with, some executed for conspiracy, others offered the chance to swear genuine loyalty to new packs. Ren was formally accepted into Darius's pack, given housing and a role in supplies management. Sarah thrived in her new position, training with Morgan and finding her place among wolves who saw her as an individual rather than a liability. Kaelira spent the time healing and training, testing the limits of her transformed ability. Elena was right. She had active control now. She could absorb specific pains, release energy in measured amounts, even direct the flow with precision. It was like learning to use her body all over again, discovering capabilities she'd never known existed. And through it all, Darius kept his distance. Not cold, not absent, but respectful of the space she needed to figure herself out. They spoke at meals, trained together occasionally, worked on pack business side by side. But he didn't push, didn't demand, didn't try to claim the connection that had been building between them. It was maddening, and also exactly what she needed. On the 8th day after the trial, Kaelira found herself standing on the wall again, her thinking spot. The compound spread below, wolves moving through their daily routines with the easy confidence of those who knew they were safe. This could be her home, if she wanted it. These could be her people. But did she want it? Or was she just gravitating toward the first safe place she'd found, confusing security with belonging? You're thinking too hard. Morgan's voice came from behind her. I can practically hear the gears grinding. Kaelira glanced over. Just trying to figure out my next move. And what are your options? Morgan leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed. Stay here. Leave and find somewhere else to build a life. Travel,
and figure out what I actually want. Kalira shrugged. They're all equally terrifying. Because they're all yours to make. Morgan was quiet for a moment. You know, when I first came to this pack, I was running from a bad situation too. Not slavery, but close enough. And Darius gave me the same speech he gave you. You're free. Make your own choices, no pressure. It took me months to actually believe it. What made you believe? Time.
And watching him actually mean it. He never punished me for testing boundaries, never withdrew support when I made mistakes, never tried to control my decisions even when he disagreed with them. Morgan's expression softened slightly. Eventually, I realized this was real, that I could build an actual life here, instead of just surviving. But you were his beta. You had a clear role. Kalira gestured vaguely. What's my role, former prisoner? Dangerous weapon? Complicated political symbol? How about pack member who happens to have a useful ability? Morgan suggested. Or just Kalira, who gets to decide for herself what she wants to be. It sounded simple when she said it like that. But Kalira had spent so long being defined by others, by Cyrus's exploitation, by her ability, by what she represented to various political factions, that the idea of self-definition felt foreign. He cares about you, Morgan said, apparently deciding subtlety was overrated. Darius. He's been a wreck this whole week, trying to give you space while clearly wanting to be near you every second. It's been almost painful to watch. Kalira's chest tightened. I know. I think. Maybe. Stop thinking. That's your problem. You're trying to logic your way through something that doesn't work on logic. Morgan pushed off the wall. You want my advice? Figure out what makes you happy. Not safe, not secure, not strategically sound, just happy. And then do that. She left Kalira alone with her thoughts and the sunset and a question that felt both simple and impossibly complex. What made her happy? The answer came to her not in a moment of revelation, but gradually over the next few days. She was happy training with Morgan and the other fighters, feeling her body grow stronger and more capable. She was happy working with Elena, learning more about her ability and how to use it to help rather than harm. She was happy at pack meals, surrounded by wolves who treated her as one of them rather than as something to be managed. And she was happy in the quiet moments with Darius when they could just exist together without performance or pressure. So on the evening of the 12th day after the trial, Kalira made a decision. She found Darius in his study, reviewing reports with the focused intensity he brought to everything. When she knocked, he looked up and something shifted in his expression. Hope and caution and poorly concealed longing. Can we talk? She asked. Always. He set aside the papers immediately, giving her his full attention. Kalira closed the door and moved to stand in front of his desk, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been facing Cyrus in combat. I've been thinking about what you said, about choices and possibility and figuring out what I want. And? His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. And I think I want to stay. Here, with this pack. With you. The words came out in a rush, and she forced herself to slow down. Not because it's safe or convenient, or because I don't have other options, but because when I imagine the future, actually imagine building a life instead of just surviving, this is where I see it happening. Darius stood slowly, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. You're sure? This isn't just, I'm sure. Kalira met his eyes steadily. I've spent the last 2 weeks testing that certainty from every angle. This is what I choose. You're who I choose. The words hung between them for a heartbeat. Then Darius closed the distance and kissed her, fierce and gentle, and full of all the restrained wanting he'd been holding back. Kalira melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and felt something in her chest finally settle into place. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against hers. You're sure? He asked again, and this time she heard the vulnerability underneath. Completely. Terrifyingly. Absolutely sure. She smiled. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to be a mess for a while. Healing isn't linear, and I have 3 years of trauma to process. I can handle mess. His hands came up to cup her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I can handle complicated. What I can't handle is losing you. You won't. The promise felt huge, weighty with implication. I'm done running, done surviving. Time to actually live. Then live here. With me. With the pack.
He paused, something shifting in his expression. Not as property or obligation, but as your mate? Kalira finished, the word feeling both foreign and right on her tongue. Darius's breath caught. I was going to say partner, but yes, if you want that. Eventually. When you're ready. Eventually, she agreed. After I've had time to be just me for a while. To figure out who Kalira is when she's not defined by suffering or survival. Fair. He kissed her again, softer this time. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The formal bonding ceremony happened 3 months later, when Kalira had finally grown comfortable in her own skin. The pack gathered in the Great Hall, the same space that had hosted Cyrus's trial, but this time it was decorated with flowers and warm light instead of judgment and chains. Sarah stood beside Kalira as she prepared, adjusting the ceremonial dress that marked her as alpha mate. It was beautiful, deep blue fabric embroidered with silver thread, covering her scars without hiding them. A statement that her past was part of her, not something to be ashamed of. You look happy, Sarah said softly. Actually, genuinely happy. I am. Kalira studied her reflection, seeing not the broken prisoner or the dangerous weapon, but a woman who'd fought her way to freedom and chosen love on the other side. It's still weird sometimes, like I'm waiting for something to go wrong. That's normal. Trauma doesn't just disappear because circumstances improve. Sarah squeezed her hand. But you're building something real here, something Cyrus could never touch. The ceremony was simple but profound. Darius stood at the front of the hall, wearing formal armor that marked him as Alpha King. When Kalira walked toward him, his expression transformed, pure joy and pride and love written across his features. The vows were traditional, spoken in the old language that predated written pack law. Promises of protection and partnership, of choosing each other through hardship and joy, of building something stronger together than either could alone. When it came time for the final exchange, Darius produced a collar, not of iron or chain, but of woven silver and leather, beautiful and delicate. It was meant to mark her as alpha mate, a symbol of belonging she could choose to wear. He held it out but didn't move to put it on her. Your choice, he said quietly. Always your choice. Kalira took the collar from his hands and fastened it around her own throat, covering the scars from the silver grounding pieces, reclaiming the space Cyrus had damaged with something beautiful and chosen. My choice, she agreed. Always. The pack erupted in cheers and howls, celebrating not just a bonding, but a victory. Over tyranny, over fear, over everything that said broken things couldn't be made whole again. Later, at the feast, Kalira found herself surrounded by wolves who'd become family. Morgan, gruff and proud, declaring that if Kalira could survive fighting a blood witch, she could definitely survive being mated to Darius. Elena pressing herbal teas on her with stern instructions about self-care. Ren, shy but grateful, thanking her for giving him the courage to break free. And through it all, Darius's solid presence beside her, his hand finding hers under the table, squeezing gently whenever the crowd got overwhelming. You good? He murmured at one point. I'm perfect. And she was. Not because everything was easy or pain-free, but because she'd earned this moment, this peace, this future. As the celebration wound down and night fell over the compound, Kalira found herself back on the wall one last time. Darius joined her, and they stood together looking out over territory that had become home. What are you thinking? He asked. That a year ago, I was running through wilderness convinced I'd die before dawn. 6 months ago, I was fighting for the right to exist freely, and now, she gestured to the compound, the celebration, the life she'd built. Now I'm here, actually here, not just surviving, but living. Any regrets? None. She leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. Though if you'd told me a year ago that I'd end up as alpha mate to the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, I'd have thought you were insane. We're both a little insane, Darius said, warmth in his voice. But it works. And it did. Not perfectly. Kalira still had nightmares, still struggled with trust and boundaries and the complicated aftermath of trauma. But she was learning, growing, becoming something more than just her worst moments. She'd started teaching other wolves with abilities how to advocate for themselves, how to set boundaries, how to recognize exploitation before it could take root. It was deeply satisfying work, using her experience to help others avoid her fate. She'd also discovered she was good at strategy, at seeing patterns others missed. Morgan had started including her in tactical planning, and Darius valued her input on political negotiations with other packs. But more than any role or title or responsibility, what Kylira valued most was the simple freedom to choose, to wake up each morning and decide how she wanted to spend her day, to say yes or no based on her own desires rather than someone else's demands. To be Kylira Voss, not the absorber, not a weapon, not a victim, but a person with agency and power and the right to exist on her own terms. "Hey," Darius said, pulling her from her thoughts. "I love you." The word still made her chest tight, but in a good way now. "I love you too." They stood together as stars wheeled overhead, and Kylira thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and fear and desperate hope that had driven her to run. The battle that had nearly destroyed her, the choice to stand and fight instead of fleeing again. She'd been prey for so long, hunted and hurt and barely surviving. But somewhere along the way, through blood and tears and stubborn refusal to break, she'd transformed into something else. Not a weapon, despite what Cyrus had tried to make her. Not a victim, despite everything she'd endured. But a queen, not in title, but in essence. Someone who'd claimed her own power, who'd fought for her place in the world and won it on her own terms. The girl running out of time had become a woman who'd seized her future with both hands, who'd looked at impossible odds and decided they were worth facing anyway, who'd learned that the strongest chains weren't made of iron but of fear and shame, and the only way to break them was to refuse their power. Kylira Voss stood on the wall beside her mate, looking out over the territory she'd helped defend, and felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt whole, not healed. Healing was ongoing, imperfect work that would probably last a lifetime, but whole in the sense that all her broken pieces had been gathered up, acknowledged, and woven into something new, something stronger, something entirely, defiantly hers. The northern wilderness had taught her to survive. Ironcrest had taught her to endure. But here, in this pack, with this man, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Freedom wasn't something granted by others. It was something you seized and held on to with everything you had, something you defended not just against external threats, but against internal doubts that said you weren't worth the fight. She was worth it. Every battle, every sacrifice, every moment of terror and pain and desperate hope, worth it all and more. And in the harsh frontier where only the strong survived, Kylira Voss had done more than survive. She'd risen. She'd transformed. She'd found not just a place to call home, but a self to call her own. That was the real victory. Not defeating Cyrus, not escaping slavery, not even the love she'd found with Darius, but the fundamental claiming of her own identity, her own worth, her own right to exist freely in a world that had tried to reduce her to property. She was prey no longer. She was queen of her own life. And nothing, no alpha, no counsel, no past trauma, would ever take that away again. The story of the girl running out of time had ended. The story of the woman who'd seized her future had just begun.